Chapter 289. Taoist robes were different from ordinary clothes. They had very good stretchability and extensibility, and could be worn as long as you squeezed them a little. In Fatty Luo's view, they were like a girl's breasts. They would always be there if you squeezed them a little. Dharmaraja used his innate lightning to knock out two female cultivators who were passing by, and dragged them into an alley. He found a secluded spot, and laid the two female cultivators flat on the ground. Then he took off their clothes. "It's so tight, Brother Luo, my chest feels so tight. I can't breathe." Dharmaraja felt like the blue Taoist robe was wrapped tightly around him like a dumpling, and it was very uncomfortable whether it was his chest or his buttocks. Fatty Luo's situation wasn't much better than Dharmaraja's. If you feel like you can't breathe, use the turtle breathing spell. "Can we do it like this?" Fatty Luo was silent for a while. "I don't know, but at least after we change our clothes, we won't be tracked by the holy array. Now we can think of a way to meet up with Ling Jinren and the others," Fatty Luo said. "If we run into anyone on the way, I'll have to trouble Brother Dharmaraja to knock them out. Before we find the master of Immortal Mansion, we should avoid fighting and conserve our strength. Lord Jinka should be fine, right? I can't say for now." Fatty Luo's first impression was that the Eastern Branch Chief's spirit-subduing flag hadn't been able to restrain Jinka. All of this had just been a game of chess for Ling Jinren to lure out the master of Immortal Mansion. But after witnessing the legendary Ice Crystal Holy Array, Fatty Luo had a deeper understanding of Immortal Mansion's heritage. Perhaps this master of Immortal Mansion had other tricks up his sleeve? To tell the truth, Fatty Luo was a little worried. If Lord Jinka is in his complete form, there's nothing to be afraid of at all. But the problem is that he doesn't have a scabbard, and only has a protective layer of sword chi that automatically condenses around him. But from another perspective, since Ling Jinren is sending Lord Jinka to lure the snake out of its hole, I think he must be confident. After Fatty Luo finished speaking, he looked up at the sky. The sky was already completely dark at this time. He could feel the 12 Stars Palace's array guardian spirits, which had been destroyed earlier, reforming. "I wonder how Immortal Toya, Cilian Jinren and Brother Fangxing are doing." Fatty Luo looked at the sky with a profound look in his eyes. Not everyone could withstand the repeated attacks of the 12 Astral Palace's array guardian spirits. When the next wave of guardian spirits reformed, they would definitely find the other invaders and kill them. Previously, whether it was Fatty Luo or the others, they had all thought that this trip would be relatively easy. But after entering Immortal Mansion's stronghold, they deeply felt the dangers of Immortal Mansion. Whether he could survive or not, it all depended on his luck. On the other side, after changing into women's Taoist robes, Wang Ling and Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal weren't in a hurry to leave. Instead, they searched the palaces of the two female cultivators, Beauty and Discount. When Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had come in through the space wall earlier, he had already noticed that the bricks and tiles used to build the palaces here weren't ordinary. They were filled with large amounts of spirit energy, and had the power to repair themselves. Bricks with self-recovery ability, what kind of concept was that? This was equivalent to hiding a Dharmaraja in each brick, and this kind of self-recovery method was even more convenient than Dharmaraja using the godly thunder inheritance to re-weld the bricks together. "Brother Ling, I feel that the master of Immortal Mansion's identity isn't ordinary." The young man in white frowned and touched the bricks embedded in the stone pillars of the palace. After touching them for less than 3 seconds, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's hand drew back, as if it had been electrocuted. Just now, he had actually sensed the fluctuations of nomological laws hidden in the bricks, which had wrapped around his finger like a viper and bitten him hard. "It's actually the power of nomological laws?" Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was a little astonished. This meant that the master of Immortal Mansion's strength was very likely at true immortal level. But he was a little puzzled. The nomological laws were set up too broadly, to the extent that each brick contained a trace of nomological laws. Even a true immortal might not be able to set them up like this. On the side, Wang Ling narrowed his eyes and couldn't help a drop of cold sweat trickling down his forehead. According to the normal list of realms, only those at true immortal level could freely use nomological laws. Of course, That didn't rule out the fact that there were a very small number of evildoers who had the strength to use nomological laws before they reached true immortal level. Comparatively speaking, however, true immortals could use nomological laws more smoothly. But to be able to spread the power of nomological laws out like a spider's web, even general, you would find it difficult to do so. In Wang Ling's view, this power already surpassed that of true immortal. But this probably wasn't the master of Immortal Mansion's own power. If he had this ability, Jinko would have changed owners long ago, and he wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. Wang Ling couldn't help sighing in his heart. Sure enough, resolving this matter as soon as possible was the right thing to do. If things dragged on like this, Immortal Mansion would be a ticking time bomb, and no one could say for sure when it would completely detonate. He told Grenade, throwing his thoughts telepathically. After hearing this, the young man in white was blank for a moment. Brother Ling, are you suspecting that there's another power behind Immortal Mansion? And that this power is directly related to the master of Immortal Mansion? In fact, halfway through Wang Ling's words, the young man in white already had a guess in his heart. Staring at the stone pillar in front of him, he took a step back. Brother Ling, do you have a way to extract a brick from this stone pillar? Crack! With his eyes fixed on the stone pillar, Wang Ling's fingers instantly turned into claws and directly stuck into the cracks around the brick. Very quickly, just like Grenade throwing Senior Immortal had felt when he had been electrocuted, he felt the nomological power in the brick attack his fingertips. Wang Ling frowned as his fingertips felt numb and itchy, but it was very light, and actually a little comfortable. It was a little like a kissing fish in a hot spring nibbling at his fingertips. Wang Ling gripped the brick tightly in front of him, and then slowly increased the strength in his hand. He extracted the brick effortlessly. Let me see. Grenade throwing Senior Immortal didn't dare touch the brick, and could only move closer to take a look. Very quickly, a look of sudden realization appeared on his face. Sure enough, Wang Ling examined the brick carefully. Apart from the nomological laws surging inside, and the patterns on its surface, he didn't see anything unusual. But he felt that the patterns on the brick were a little familiar, as if he had seen them somewhere before. Brother Ling, do you know about familiars? Chapter 290. Wang Ling had long heard rumors about tamed demons, but he hadn't expected to encounter them so soon. With the mark left by the tamed demon on the brick as evidence, it could be said that the relationship between Immortal Mansion and the stone demon was now official. Summoning a tamed demon was also strictly prohibited under Huaxiao Nation's laws. Like the rule that one was not allowed to inherit the Taoist tradition, it was also listed as a crime of anti-cultivation opportunism. But the tamed demon wasn't the key issue right now. How on earth did the master of Immortal Mansion know about the magic array used to summon them? This was something worth thinking about. While he was thinking, Grenade throwing Senior Immortal thought of something. There was a time when there was a widespread rumor on the market about a magic array used to summon a tamed demon. In the end, it was discovered that it was nothing more than a hoax. Some criminals disguised a transmission array as a magic array and tricked a lot of people into throwing antiques into it. Wang Ling. But a lot of people only know one thing about a magic array. Not all so-called antiques or relics can be used as a medium to summon a tamed demon. If you want to summon a tamed demon, the relic itself must contain a huge amount of residual spirit energy. For example, if Dharmaraja used the godly thunder inheritance as a medium in conjunction with the magic array, the summoning would definitely be successful, said Grenade throwing Senior Immortal. Hearing this, Wang Ling nodded. After all, the godly thunder inheritance was a holy relic left behind by the Thunder clan. But when all is said and done, this is against the law. Even if he knew about the magic array, Dharmaraja wouldn't do such a thing. Grenade throwing Senior Immortal sighed and spread his hands. Brother Ling, keep this brick for now. This brick alone is enough evidence to convict the master of Immortal Mansion of a serious crime. Furthermore, the viciousness of this matter has already surpassed that of that old devil. Wang Ling put the brick away with his vision screen, and the two of them were about to leave when they suddenly heard hurried footsteps in front of the two female cultivators' residence. Someone's here. Grenade-throwing senior immortal hurriedly dragged the two female cultivators into the inner hall. A few seconds later, a female cultivator's voice came directly from the door. Beauty, discount. Are you there? Elder Xing wants to summon us to discuss how to fight the invaders. Should I open the door, Brother Ling? While grenade-throwing senior immortal was hesitating, the female cultivator directly pushed the door open and entered. Wang Ling noticed that this female cultivator was wearing an orange Taoist robe and had squinting eyes. Based on the memories he had retrieved from the two female cultivators, he immediately knew that this person should be a true disciple of Immortal Mansion, a level higher than an inner sect disciple. The elder-level Taoist robes were gay purple. The slit-eyed female cultivator saw the two of them from a distance of a dozen meters. At this moment, the white-clothed youth felt a buzzing sound in his head. What to do? Am I going to be exposed? After a few seconds of silence, the slit-eyed female cultivator exclaimed, Wow! Beautiful! Discount! How did you become like this? Did you go for plastic surgery behind Master's back? Grenade-throwing senior immortal. The slit-eyed female cultivator took a closer look, her gaze fixed on him as she walked up and down. You're offering a discount, aren't you? Look at your oval-shaped face. Wang Ling. The female cultivator looked at Wang Ling. Which face-shaping technician in the mansion did you get for your face? I think that your new dead fish eyes are quite unique. Not bad, not bad. Wang Ling. After that, the female cultivator looked at grenade-throwing senior immortal again and rubbed her chin. Beautiful, did you get a height enhancement spell and breast implants? By the way, why is senior sister Yixian looking for us? Grenade-throwing senior immortal used spirit energy to change the voice in his throat and imitated the online celebrity face from before to talk to the female cultivator in front of him. He looked at the nameplate on the female cultivator's waist, which was engraved with the name, Yixian, and it was obvious that this was her Taoist name. Grenade-throwing senior immortal recalled that the online celebrity face and the oval face also had nameplates on their waists, but they hadn't taken them off when they had changed their clothes. It looks like I'll have to bring my nameplate with me later, otherwise it'll definitely raise suspicions, grenade-throwing senior immortal thought. Although, it already looked quite suspicious now. Elder Xing wants to summon all the inner sect disciples. I'm here to inform them. This senior sister Yixian stared at the disguised Wang Ling and grenade-throwing senior immortal and said very seriously, This is a very serious matter, and Elder Xing wants you to go as soon as possible. Do you know the flat top of Yuntai Pavilion? Gather there in 10 minutes. Okay. Senior sister Yixian. Don't be late. The slit-eyed female cultivator smiled. With that said, the slit-eyed female cultivator went to inform the next palace. Grenade-throwing senior immortal looked at her receding figure and couldn't help sweating. Their faces had been so close just now, almost touching, but in the end, she hadn't realized that they were in disguise. It seemed that not all slit-eyed people were monsters, and slit-eyed people were really blind. Following the directions, Wang Ling and grenade-throwing senior immortal arrived at the flat top of Yuntai Pavilion 10 minutes later. Wang Ling didn't know the specific location of Yuntai Pavilion, but when this senior sister had come to the palace to inform them, he had left a spiritual mark on her. That senior sister Yixian from before had already arrived, and was standing at the very top of the flat top, followed by a female elder in a purple Taoist robe. At that moment, about 100 inner sect disciples had gathered on the flat top, and Wang Ling and grenade-throwing senior immortal were among them. The inner sect female disciples trembled in the face of the elder's wrath on the high platform. I did a head count just now, and realized that there are actually 2 people who haven't arrived yet. The purple-robed female elder took a deep breath and said, The Manor Lord is furious. Furthermore, he suspects that there might already be spies among the inner sect disciples. It's very likely that those who sneaked into our immortal mansion are disguised as our disciples. But in such an urgent situation, there's actually someone who's late? Yixian, what are you doing? The slit-eyed female cultivator trembled slightly at this stern interrogation. This disciple is incompetent. I'm willing to accept punishment, Shifu. Naturally, punishment is inevitable. The female elder snorted. Do you know who those two female disciples who haven't arrived yet are? Find them out for me. It's Little Bamboo and Little Chrysanthemum. I've clearly already informed them. The slit-eyed female cultivator was a little aggrieved. But they seem to have put on a little weight recently, so it might be a little difficult for them to climb the mountain. The elder in purple was blank. Put on a little weight? Not long after this elder in purple said this, Wang Ling and Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal saw two plump female cultivators walk up the steps to the top of the flat roof. Because their Taoist robes were too small, their calves were directly exposed, and the hair on their calves fluttered in the cool breeze on the top of the flat roof. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal almost spat out a mouthful of blood at this scene. Chapter 291. Because of their overly frightening entrance, the 100 or so female cultivators, including the elder in purple, were dead silent for a full 3 minutes. This scene caused the purple-clothed female elder to suck in a breath of cold air. Then, she slightly tilted her head to look at the female cultivator beside her with squinted eyes. Art courtyard. So this is Xiao Zhu and Xiao Zhu after they put on weight? Slit-eyed, she nodded seriously. That's right, Shifu. Then, the female elder in purple's face twitched for a long time. This was supposed to be a fish bamboo wheel that had been soaked in hot pot, and a mutated overlord flower. When Dharmaraja and Fatty Luo climbed the stairs, they could clearly sense the subtle atmosphere in the field. Brother Luo, we haven't been discovered, have we? The fervent gazes around them, especially from the elder in purple on the platform, were like those of Mitep-chan, who had discovered a criminal, and there was a hint of ferocity in her eyes. Fatty Luo sighed softly. TSK, I thought our disguise was perfect. Wang Ling now understood that these two King Kong Barbies didn't know what B was at all. In fact, if Dharmaraja and Fatty Luo hadn't appeared here, Wang Ling felt that he and Grenade-throwing would have been able to fish in troubled waters for a while. However, the moment these two King Kong Barbies appeared on the rooftop, their plan had already been disrupted. What kind of evildoer are you? Hurry up and surrender. The female elder in purple on the platform waved her sleeves, and two golden lights instantly streaked across her sleeves to form circles of runes that abruptly turned into a cage in the air and swiftly enveloped them. The slit-eyed female cultivator was shaken by her Shifu's vigorous attack. Shifu, what are you doing? They're all sisters. The female elder in purple unceremoniously reached out and smacked her on the head. Are you stupid? The female elder sighed in her heart. She shouldn't have sent her to inform the inner sect, otherwise there wouldn't have been so much trouble. There was no doubt that Yixian's strength was the strongest among all the inner sanctum disciples here. Thus, she had been taken in as her direct disciple a long time ago. However, her only weakness was that she was a little stupid and blind. Given the urgency of the situation, the purple-clothed elder did not have the time to explain in detail. She only sighed and briefly said, "These two are intruders from the outside world. They must have changed into Xiao Zhu and Xiao Zhu's clothes to sneak in." At this point, the slit-eyed female cultivator called Yixian suddenly realized. So that's how it is. While he was explaining to Yixian, the battle was on the verge of breaking out. The female cultivators of Immortal Mansion's inner sect scattered to the sides to make space. They were well trained, and even though the battle had started instantly, they didn't panic in the slightest. In this case, the priority was to evacuate to an open area to avoid being affected by the impact of the spells in the battle. Of course, Fatty Luo and Dharmaraja weren't ordinary people either. The female elder's attacks were fast enough, but the stability of this trapping technique was only SOSO, in order to capture both of them at the same time. BZD. Dharmaraja chose to face it head-on. He used the godly thunder inheritance and struck the air. The runes in the sky were instantly covered by the godly thunder, and then disintegrated bit by bit. Is this the legendary Thunder Clan's holy relic? The female elder's eyes were filled with shock. Although she had heard the emergency announcement from the Immortals' mansion, saying that the invaders this time were very difficult to deal with, the female elder had never thought that there would be descendants of the Thunder Clan among the invaders. Her preemptive attack just now had not worked. Apart from a slight ripple in her eyes when she saw Dharmaraja's godly thunder inheritance, There was no other change in the female elder's eyes. "You're a descendant of the Thunder clan?" The female elder stared intently at Dharmaraja. She knew that with Dharmaraja's status, the other intruders would definitely not be ordinary people. Then, she turned her gaze to Fatty Luo. "Then you must be Boss Luo? It just so happens that our Manor Lord has something important to discuss with you." Fatty Luo chuckled as he stared at the female elder on the high platform. "What a coincidence. I also happen to have something to discuss with your master. Your master took our Ling Jinren's spirit sword by force and took it away. This debt must be settled." "Seized by force?" The female elder glanced at Fatty Luo. "That spirit sword clearly belonged to our master. You trespassed on a mortal mansion, and he has already ordered that all the intruders except you will be executed on the spot." Fatty Luo was amused. "I've seen a lot of robbers in pursuit of magic treasures over the years, but I've never seen anyone so shameless. After seizing someone else's sword, they say it was their own to begin with. Since that's the case, Brother Dharmaraja, let's do it. Don't stand on ceremony." Dharmaraja stretched out his hand, and lightning flashed in all directions. It was the full power of the godly thunder inheritance. When he exhaled, the sky and earth changed color, and dark clouds instantly roiled in the night sky. Boom! A thunderbolt fell from the sky and struck Dharmaraja's body, which then turned into a lightning armor. Wang Ling and Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal watched from the crowd of Immortal Mansion female disciples in the distance. They felt that Dharmaraja had somehow become a lot more handsome in this state. The power of the godly thunder inheritance not only formed a lightning armor derived from the power of nature, it also stimulated Dharmaraja's muscles at the same time, making his body a lot more toned. At the same time, Fatty Luo stretched out his hand and took out a set of animal skin armor from his treasury, which he put on. Wang Ling had seen this animal skin armor before in Fatty Luo's metal shop. It was the heavenly demon pig skin armor that Fatty Luo was so proud of, also known as pig armor. Although Fatty Luo had already modified the spirit energy attribute on this pig skin armor, it still couldn't conceal the heavenly demon pig's demon king aura. As soon as the pig armor was taken out, the elder in purple on the stage already showed great interest. She was starting to understand why the Manor Lord was so interested in this Boss Luo. "Brother Luo, be careful. This woman won't be easy to deal with." Dharmaraja frowned. Judging from their current overall combat strength, their strength was infinitely close to the late soul formation stage, which was more than enough to deal with this group of inner sect disciples. But this female elder in purple on the high stage wasn't easy to deal with, and they would need to work together to deal with her. However, this female elder in purple wasn't that stupid. Although Dharmaraja and Fatty Luo's current strength could crush any of the inner sect disciples present, if they combined their strength, it wouldn't be easy to deal with them either. At the moment, the greatest strength that these 100 or so inner sect disciples could unleash was by working together to set up an array. With the support of such a powerful array, even an itinerant immortal would find it hard to escape. At this thought, the female elder couldn't help looking excited. "Listen to my command. Set up the array." "Brother Ling, not good." Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal cried out in alarm. Almost at the same time that the female elder shouted for them to set up the array, Wang Ling stepped forward. In that instant, it was as if time had stopped. In the next moment, a large number of female disciples collapsed under the powerful spiritual pressure that they couldn't bear. The female elder on the high stage paled in shock. What was she seeing? Chapter 292. If Loopy Toad was here, it would definitely find this scene very familiar. The only difference was that Loopy Toad had collapsed on its own back then, while Wang Ling was releasing genuine spiritual pressure this time. What kind of scene was this? In the distance, Dharmaraja and Fatty Luo felt a deep sense of terror in their hearts. Below the female elder, there were no less than 100 female disciples at the soul formation stage. When the elder gave the order to set up the array, all of them froze in place, as if they had been hit by a full set of sunflower acupuncture hands. After that, in a mere 2 seconds, the group of female disciples fell down like dominoes. Even their postures were frozen, as if they had fallen into a petrified state. Their eyes were all glazed. And they all had an expression, as if they had no idea what had just happened. What's going on? The female elder stood on a high place, her eyes narrowed into slits. Among the large number of female disciples who had collapsed due to the strong spiritual pressure, she saw two female disciples with slightly larger skeletons standing in the middle of the crowd. They were like two unmoving mountains. The moment Wang Ling's spiritual pressure descended, the female elder reacted, but she was still one step too late. The protective spirit light she had spread out only protected this silly disciple next to her. And the rest of the inner sect female disciples were all killed in an instant. Art courtyard, what's going on? The corners of the female elder's mouth twitched. The slit-eyed female cultivator rubbed her head. This is betrayal. A blatant betrayal. Shifu, as expected, you can't judge a book by its cover. It's fine if you say that beauty and discount usually like plastic surgery. But who would have thought that they would be so vicious as to help outsiders harm their own people? The female elder in purple dropped her forehead into her hand, feeling an excruciating pain in her head. Can't you see that they're two men? Men. The slit-eyed female cultivator was stunned by her Shifu's question, and only then did she start to carefully size up Wang Ling and grenade-throwing senior immortal. After a while, she shook her head and looked at her Shifu innocently. Their faces are so fair and clean. How can they be men? After saying this, Miss Art Courtyard sighed. Sure enough, cute people are all boys. The purple-clothed female elder's face was already twisted into a ball, and the wrinkles on her face looked like a steamed bun. She was no longer in the mood to argue with her foolish disciple. On the other end of the high platform, Dharmaraja and Fatty Luo had also recovered from their shock. What was going on? Ling Jinren and grenade-throwing senior immortal were also cross-dressing? Looks like my deduction was completely correct. Fatty Luo couldn't help laughing inwardly. Fatty Luo felt a deep sense of pride when he saw that Wang Ling had used the same strategy as him to change into this group of female disciples' Taoist robes to fool the holy array. It seems to be my first time seeing Ling Jinren like this. Dharmaraja murmured, utterly stunned in his heart. Ling Jinren's face was very fair to begin with, and now that he was wearing a veil, coupled with the corset that came with the female Taoist robe, he really did look like a cute little girl from a distance, and didn't look out of place at all. The only flaw was Ling Jinren's expression. This was Ling Jinren's trademark dead fish eyes, which could basically be seen up close. Unless Ling Jinren deliberately hid it, these eyes were really too eye-catching. I feel like I've seen something incredible. Dharmaraja stood at a distance and didn't dare approach at all. Fatty Luo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Do you think we'll be silenced? Somehow it felt very dangerous. The two of them looked at Wang Ling from a distance. Wang Ling pretended not to see them, his expression unchanging without the slightest hint of embarrassment on his face. On the high platform, the female elder could see the severity of the situation. She fixed her gaze on Wang Ling and snorted sternly. It looks like you're the backbone of the invaders this time. If you kneel down now and beg for mercy, Your Majesty, you might still have a chance to live. You guys really have guts. Are all dark forces so arrogant now? Grenade-throwing senior immortal snorted. Now that his identity had been exposed, he had nothing to fear at all. I thought Immortal Palace was only at this level. We can poke someone like you to death with one finger. The female elder pursed her lips and was instantly enraged. With a cold snort, she took a step forward, and the entire flat roof of Yuntai Pavilion instantly shook. Like an electric current, a fierce energy was transmitted from under Wang Ling's feet, ready to explode. This was a show of strength, but it was extremely powerful. If the power of an itinerant immortal exploded under Wang Ling's feet, a cultivator at the early soul formation stage would instantly have their internal organs ruptured and their primordial spirit shaken. However, Wang Ling's gaze was fixed on this ball of energy under the ground. A moment later, he merely rubbed his feet against the ground, but the energy was instantly intercepted and turned into nothingness in the blink of an eye. The flat roof was quiet again, and even the shaking stopped. Unexpectedly, it hadn't been of any use at all. What's going on? The female elder was stupefied. She had no idea how her attack had been neutralized at all. But at that moment, The slit-eyed female cultivator next to her suddenly had better vision. Shifu, I think I just saw the foot of that cute boy with dead fish eyes, who looks like a girl, rub against the ground. The purple-clothed female elder didn't have the time to ridicule the first half of the sentence. Her complexion was very unsightly. That kick of hers just now wasn't King similar to the times are calling. It was the power of a loose immortal's kick. Even if the other party had reacted and counterattacked, shouldn't he have stomped his foot heavily to restrain her strength? He had actually just rubbed his foot against the ground, and the energy had been neutralized. The purple-robed female elder's eyes widened in disbelief. At that moment, she felt a trace of fear in her heart. It was obvious that she hadn't fully understood the gap in strength between them. What was a true expert? Even if it was just a small counterattack, he could do it without batting an eyelid. Based on this point alone, the female elder had already admitted in her heart that she had already lost. At this thought, a few drops of cold sweat couldn't help trickling down her forehead. Shifu, you can't beat him, can you? The slit-eyed female cultivator asked. And what made her feel the most humiliating was that this stupid disciple just had to expose her at that moment. Why had she accepted such a thing back then? The corners of the female elder's mouth twitched. Since it was a fact that she couldn't beat him, there was nothing wrong with admitting it. At that moment, the female elder actually felt a little grateful to Wang Ling. It was a good thing that the wave of spiritual pressure had knocked out the 100 or so inner sect disciples. Otherwise she would have lost face in front of all of them, which would have been a real humiliation. She was a dignified itinerant immortal, and the power of her kick had been neutralized by a young man dressed in female clothes with just a brush of his toe. This was really too cruel. Thus, the female elder completely understood that this bunch of people had deliberately come to cause trouble. The way this young man in female clothes had rubbed his foot against the ground just now could be summed up in one sentence. I just rubbed, but I couldn't get in. Then here was the problem. Chapter 293. It was obvious that the current situation had already exceeded her expectations. If this youngster hadn't been here, she felt that even if Dharmaraja and Fatty Luo joined forces, they would at least have had a 50-50 chance of winning. Furthermore, as an itinerant immortal, she should have had a greater advantage. Unfortunately, Wang Ling's appearance had disrupted all her plans, and she was at a loss as to what to do. At this moment, all kinds of thoughts circled around the female elder's mind. How about it, do you want to surrender? She indeed had this thought. When she saw Wang Ling offset the power of her kick with just a brush against the ground, she thought that the outcome of this duel was already decided, and she didn't want to fight anymore. However, she didn't dare give up so easily. Even if she gave up here, the master would definitely vent his anger on her in the end. When all was said and done, she was just someone caught in the middle. No matter how she played this chess piece, she would only face an awkward situation. Whenever this happened, it was often the best choice to throw the blame on someone else. The female elder in purple stared at the eldest heir disciple next to her, and was silent for a moment. Shifu, what should we do now? The slit-eyed female cultivator asked. Yixian, go and call your martial uncle Feifei over, the female elder in purple said without hesitation. The slit-eyed female cultivator. But, how should I call him? The female elder. Didn't you make a clay jar earlier? Your martial uncle marked it on your birthday. As long as you smash it, your martial uncle will come. Grenade-throwing senior immortal was amused. You can't beat me, so you want to call for help? The corners of the female elder's mouth couldn't help twitching. You have the advantage in numbers, so you can't be considered a hero even if you win. Fine, up to you. Grenade-throwing senior immortal spread his hands. Naturally, he wasn't looking for trouble for Wang Ling. He had personally agreed to it. Although Wang Ling's kick had dispelled the power of the female elder's kick just now, his real intention had been to use the energy released by that kick to link it with her spirit energy. This way, he would be able to conduct a secret memory search without anyone noticing. But after examining the female elder's memories, Wang Ling was greatly disappointed, because she wasn't qualified at all. She had had very limited contact with the master of Immortal Mansion, and didn't know him much better than those female inner sect disciples. Now that the other party wanted to call someone over, Wang Ling couldn't be happier. The identity of the helper, who was called for under this kind of request, was definitely not simple. Under the guidance of the purple-robed female cultivator, the slit-eyed female cultivator took out the earthen jar with trembling hands. Then, with a loud cry, she fiercely threw it on the ground. The moment the pot broke, whether it was Wang Ling, grenade-throwing senior immortal, or Dharmaraja and Fatty Luo, who were standing nearby, all of them could clearly sense the vigorous spirit energy that surged out of the broken pot. What powerful spirit power! Grenade-throwing senior immortal frowned. Psionic power was the standard unit used to measure the strength of spiritual power. There was a meter on the market that could be used to measure psionic power, and the psionic power that was released at this moment was estimated to have reached the saturation level of a common meter. In the truest sense of the word, it was 100% psionic power. Who is it? A few seconds after the pot broke, there was an explosive roar in the air, as if it had come from the distant horizon, echoing endlessly. Then, a huge black shadow descended from the sky, causing an intense tremor and roar. After his initial contact with Immortal Mansion, Wang Ling already knew that there were no male disciples in Immortal Mansion. But while there were no male disciples, the appearance of this giant beast in front of them was still a little unexpected. This was a huge silver horse that was only 20 zhang tall. Dressed in battle armor, it stared at Wang Ling and the others with a fierce gaze. What the hell is this thing? A huge shadow loomed over them, and Dharmaraja and the others instantly broke out in sweat. This oppressive force was too strong. I feel that this horse has something to do with the holy array. Fatty Luo frowned deeply, but very quickly, they felt the pressure on them disappear as Wang Ling spread the golden light shield over everyone present. This silver warhorse stared at the golden light shield in silence for a long while. Then, its huge body gradually shrank to a normal size, but the pressure it gave off didn't lessen at all. Brother Ling, could this be? Grenade-throwing senior immortal had already sensed this warhorse's origin. There was absolutely no way he could be wrong. Wang Ling stared at the silver warhorse in front of him and narrowed his eyes. This was a genuine holy beast, and its body was also mixed with the ability bestowed by the core array pattern, which was why it had such powerful strength that was saturated with spiritual energy. When they had been sucked into the game space back then, Grenade-throwing senior immortal clearly remembered that Wang Ling had severed the array pattern with one slash of his sword, causing the entire space to instantly collapse. Now the power of the core array pattern was attached to this holy beast. If it was seriously injured, it wouldn't directly cause the ice crystal array to collapse, but the structure of the space would definitely be greatly affected. At that time, he wouldn't have to continue wearing women's clothes. Of course, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that there was actually a holy beast hidden inside this immortal talisman. Wasn't this a species that had gone extinct long ago? Whether it was inside or outside the country, it was already a huge discovery for a first-class spirit beast to appear. Not so long ago, countless spirit beasts had been on the verge of extinction because of cultivators' frantic campaigns and hunting. In ancient times, a lot of spirit beasts and even holy beasts had been killed to make bone soup and meatballs. In ancient records, there was a pitiful holy beast, a 9-headed lion, who had been beheaded by a brat and made into braised lion's head. Although they didn't know the origin of this silver warhorse for the time being, given its aura, it was definitely a holy beast. Was it you who injured our people from Immortal Mansion? Since you're here, you can all stay. The silver warhorse roared and raised its front hooves. In an instant, the space around them changed, and the scene in front of them actually shifted to a desert. Everyone was sucked in, and Dharmaraja and Fatty Luo were deeply shocked. It's actually an intrinsic spirit field. Fatty Luo narrowed his eyes. What's that? Dharmaraja was stunned. It's also a form of a small world, also known as an internal small world. After it's formed in the body, it can be used in an instant, and is mostly used in battle. The person who releases the spirit field stores a huge amount of spirit energy, which can only be used by the person who releases the spirit field. In other words, once our spirit energy is used up, we won't be able to replenish it in the intrinsic spirit field. Fatty Luo narrowed his eyes. As expected of a holy beast. Then what do we do now? We can only rely on Lingzhenren. We're not strong enough to face an enemy who can release an intrinsic spirit field. Fatty Luo sighed and patted Dharmaraja on the shoulder. Hurry up and do more commentary like me. Most commentators won't die. Dharmaraja. Chapter 294. The power of the intrinsic spirit field was self-evident. Just being in it made people feel uncomfortable. Of course, there were two exceptions, the violet-clothed female elder and the narrow-eyed female cultivator called Yixian. Their bodies were covered with a layer of magic incantations, but this layer of magic incantations was like a secret key. It could eliminate the sense of oppression brought by the intrinsic spirit field, as well as the feeling of spiritual power being cut off, and maintain the smooth flow of spiritual power to the outside world. How is it, true monarch? Can you tell what this sacred beast is? While Wang Ling and the silver warhorse were facing off, Dharmaraja and Fatty Luo hurriedly found an opportunity to join them. I can't tell for the time being. Grenade-throwing senior immortal couldn't help shivering. These two people dressed as women were really too scary. Holy beasts all have their own names. If I can find out the name of this silver warhorse, I might be able to find out its weakness from the ancient texts. Fatty Luo stared at the silver warhorse with a deep frown. For some reason, he felt that this silver warhorse reminded him of a certain totem he had seen in the past. The totem was a silver-furred warhorse. It wore shoulder armor, had a single horn on its head and two wide steel wings. After staring at the warhorse for a long time, Fatty Luo shook his head. This holy beast should be a unicorn, but I don't know its specific name yet. Grenade-throwing senior immortal. I heard the disciple next to the female Taoist in purple call this holy beast martial Uncle Feifei. Shocked, Dharmaraja blurted out. So it's called Ma Feifei? Grenade-throwing senior immortal and Fatty Luo. At that moment, in the intrinsic spirit field, Wang Ling and the silver warhorse looked at each other deeply. The silver warhorse was shocked. Under normal circumstances, after entering the intrinsic spirit field, apart from the person who released the field, and the person who gave the spirit field the key, everyone else's spiritual energy would be greatly suppressed. Once their spiritual energy was depleted, there would be no way to replenish it. Therefore, when many cultivators were sucked into an intrinsic spirit field, they would adopt the tactic of being tortured. Their first priority was to preserve their spiritual energy and break out of the spirit field. However, what shocked the silver warhorse was that it could sense that the young man in front of it was brimming with spiritual energy. It was as if he was not affected at all. Wang Ling had already changed out of his female Taoist robes, and was only wearing a red and black sports jacket, and a pair of track pants. This was what shocked the silver warhorse the most. Without any Taoist robes or magic treasures to protect him, he was able to resist the intrinsic spirit field with just his physical body. How powerful was his source of spirit energy? Furthermore, under the continuous effect of the golden protective light of the sanctification body, the consumption of spiritual power should have been greatly increased. However, not only did this youth not feel anything, he even split the golden light to protect the other three. Was he really human? The silver horse found it hard to imagine how a cultivator in the level of a perfected cultivator could have such inexhaustible spiritual energy. No one can do as they please in my spirit realm. The silver horse narrowed its eyes. Suddenly, the steel wings on its body spread out. They were more than 200 feet wide. The tips of the wings faced the sky like two steel blades. The muscles on its forelimbs bulged, and the ground shook violently as its iron hooves stomped on the ground. Less than 10 meters after it took off, it soared into the sky. The steel wings on its back flapped left and right, and both wings cut through the air as it charged at Wang Ling in a cross shape. Wang Ling stretched out his right hand, and spirit energy instantly formed a vortex in his palm. Then he pushed his hand forward lightly. This was just a test attack to gauge the strength of this wing attack. This highly concentrated spirit energy was a turbine-shaped spirit wall that released powerful spirit power, but was easily smashed by the silver horse's wing attack halfway. Wang Ling narrowed his eyes at this scene. As he had expected, this silver horse's wing attack had the effect of breaking through defense. To some extent, it could ignore the defense of the golden protective light and inflict damage. The corners of grenade-throwing Senior Immortal and the others' mouths twitched at this scene. In the middle of such a tense fight, this youth actually had the leisure to release a probing defense to test the other party's attack. Too abnormal. Fatty Luo was horrified from the bottom of his heart. Looking at it from another angle, Brother Ling is very confident in his ability to cast spells instantaneously. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal also sighed. If someone could improve their ability to cast spells instantaneously to the extreme, they would indeed be able to do what Wang Ling did, and wouldn't have to worry about making the first move. Even if they launched an attack later on, whether it was for attack or defense, they would be able to release multiple spells in an instant. In the air, the silver horse cast a complicated look at Wang Ling. This scene also left him flabbergasted, but before he could stop marveling at it, something even more frightening happened. Wang Ling's hand turned into a knife, and a tremendous amount of spirit energy swirled around his palm. In the end, it directly transformed into a spirit knife that was dozens of meters long. It also drew a cross in the air and pushed at the wing attack in midair. If this was an attack that could break through defense, then the countermeasure was very obvious. It was fine as long as the attack didn't get close. In that instant, sweat broke out on the silver horse's forehead. Even at such a distance, it could already feel the sting of this wind pressure. In the face of absolute power, it realized that everything else was superfluous. The two crosses collided in the air, and in the end, they were directly destroyed. At that moment, the silver warhorse finally realized how serious the situation was. As a holy beast, its ability to sense danger was far superior to that of a normal cultivator. Although it couldn't accurately calculate how strong the youngster in front of it was, it immediately made the right choice. Flapping its steel wings in front of it, it recklessly charged at Wang Ling from the horizon, like a massive meteor falling from the sky, ready to perish together with Wang Ling. The silver horse thought that as long as its attack hit its target, it would definitely be a suicidal attack. It could be said that it would hurt the enemy 1,000 times, and hurt itself 800 times. But the silver horse didn't care in the slightest. As it charged down from the sky, it had taken advantage of the right time and the right place. Whether it was in terms of timing or position, it had done just fine. The truth was that it had planned very well. With the intrinsic spirit field and the core array pattern supporting each other, there was no way it would die. Holy beasts were called holy beasts not only because they had a long lifespan that surpassed that of first-class spirit beasts, but also because of the holy beast heart they carried. As long as the beast heart was preserved, it would have a terrifying ability to recover. Thus, in theory, Wang Ling would definitely be the one to be injured, or even killed in the end. Even if he was seriously injured, the core array pattern and the holy beast heart would protect him, so he wouldn't die at the very least. Chapter 295. Wang Ling looked up at the sky, his black and red jacket flapping wildly in the wind. The collar of the jacket was open, and the young man's distinct collarbones and defined lines could be clearly seen. For the silver horse, the body looked thinner and thinner than any body it had ever seen before. However, the spiritual energy contained in the body shocked even the horse. He was just a mere human cultivator, but with the support of its intrinsic spirit field and the core array pattern, and his spirit power was saturated, he still couldn't contend with it. The silver horse already had no words to describe this strange feeling. For the first time, it didn't feel like it was facing a human cultivator, but that it was challenging the entire world on its own. The chosen one. Did this kind of person really exist? The moment it turned into a fireball and a meteor, the silver warhorse pondered deeply in its heart. At that moment, the intrinsic spirit field shook, and the silver warhorse fell from the sky in Wang Ling's direction. The moment it landed, the silver warhorse actually had no idea what the outcome would be, because after the previous two confrontations, it had learned time and again that this young man in front of it couldn't be judged by common sense. To be, or not to be, to do it, or not to do it, to crash or not to crash. The second before it hit the ground, the silver warhorse felt that this philosophical theory was like Schrödinger's cat. You could only know if you did it. Wang Ling gazed at the fireball in the sky as it grew larger and larger, and took a deep breath. Even he had to admit that this attack was very fierce. If he was hit by it without any protection, the consequences would definitely be very serious. Under such a fierce attack, the usual choice would be to go all out to defend, but doing so now would put him in even more danger. Furthermore, the silver horse's theory of dealing 1,000 damage to the enemy and 800 damage to oneself had been based on Wang Ling's theory of going all out to defend. Since ancient times, those who had attained sage body had always been conceited and liked to rely on their golden bodies to charge around. However, the silver horse had overlooked Wang Ling's own choice. For Wang Ling, even if he had the power of a sage body, the best defense was actually offense. Thus, as the silver warhorse fell like a meteor, Wang Ling gathered strength in his right fist. He punched. A loud boom came from the intrinsic spirit field. It was as if Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal and the others had seen an invisible steel cannon, with a warhead radius of 30 zhang, shoot out directly with Wang Ling at its center, and the powerful recoil directly caused the ground behind him to collapse. The wind pressure from the punch had only just neared the silver warhorse when it began to vomit blood in midair. If it wasn't for the fact that the armor on its body absorbed a certain amount of damage from the wind pressure, it would have already died. But as a holy beast, even so, it still maintained its stubbornness as it did its best to dive toward Wang Ling one last time. But to Wang Ling, all of this was meaningless. Behind the silver warhorse, the female elder in purple and the slit-eyed female cultivator watched helplessly as the silver warhorse, which had turned into a fiery meteor, was intercepted by the power of Wang Ling's fist in the sky, and then crashed miserably to one side. He plunged headfirst into the ground. At that moment, he couldn't help wanting to recite a poem. Then, I died, and even my feathers rotted in the ground. Why are there tears in my eyes? Because of the depth of my love for this land. Shifu, did Martial Uncle Fei lose? The slit-eyed female cultivator asked as she sucked on her fingers. The female elder in purple's face twitched, but before she could knock her stupid disciple on the head, the young man's cannon-like punch had already smashed into the spirit wall of the intrinsic spirit field, and countless cracks instantly spread out like a spider web. Not good. The female elder turned pale with fright, but it was already too late. The silver warhorse was seriously injured, and the spirit field keys she had given to master and disciple had already lost their effect. Thus, the moment the spirit wall broke, the two of them were sucked out at the same time, thrown up by the impact of the spirit field, and then smashed into the ground on the flat roof of Yuntai Pavilion. On the other side, with the intrinsic spirit field destroyed, Wang Ling and the others had escaped unscathed. The protective golden light had perfectly blocked the impact of the shattering of the intrinsic spirit field, and they landed steadily on the ground. The silver warhorse spat out blood and collapsed on one side of the platform, its neck crooked. Wang Ling stared at it and sighed in his heart. There was stubbornness in its eyes, and it was full of unyielding anger as it tried to get up again. Wang Ling raised his foot and was wondering if he should stomp on it one last time, when Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal suddenly shouted at him. Brother Ling, show mercy. Although we can't see holy beasts anymore, if they still exist, they're state-protected animals. Oh, so it was a state-protected animal. Wang Ling thought for a bit, and finally withdrew his foot, as the warhorse's forehead was beaded with sweat. If he had stomped on it just now, the silver warhorse could already imagine the outcome. Although its holy beast heart had been injured, and was already bleeding, it hadn't been completely destroyed. With such a serious injury, as long as it was given 5 days, no 3 days, it would be able to recover completely. If it had been a normal spirit beast, even a first-class spirit beast, with such a serious injury, without any means of treatment, the only thing it could do was wait for death. Powerful vitality. This was the reason why sacred beasts were called sacred beasts. It was also one of the main reasons why holy beasts had gone extinct. In those years, cultivators who pursued heavenly Tao and sought eternal life had fought many times for the hearts of holy beasts, and had even started a world war over a single heart. But modern cultivation science had already shown that the reason why the hearts of holy beasts were so powerful was because their blood was different from the rest. To put it simply, the reason why a holy beast's heart could be used was because it was inside a holy beast's body. Once the heart was taken out, it would just be a nourishment to soothe bowels and relieve bowel movements. At that moment, the panting silver warhorse lying on the ground with its head tilted to one side had already lost all of its previous arrogance. It had always hated human cultivators, and had chosen to cooperate with Immortal Mansion purely for revenge. Thus, it didn't even care about the master of Immortal Mansion, but after exchanging blows with Wang Ling just now, the silver warhorse had already sensed that this human cultivator in front of it wasn't the same kind of trash as anyone it had ever seen before. Thus, when Wang Ling had approached it, it had felt a deep sense of fear. This was also the first time it had felt fear. Everything had returned to the same old question. Who on earth are you? The silver warhorse asked weakly as it lay on the ground, its tone filled with fear. Wang Ling felt that every time he fought and lost, this was a question that everyone would ask. But today Wang Ling was prepared. With a wave of his hand, a spirit light flashed, and he took out a brown booklet. The silver warhorse laughed weakly. You want to take advantage of my weakness to use the codex to subdue me? Later, it realized that it had been thinking too much. Wang Ling put the brown booklet in front of it. It was surprised to find that it was actually a student ID card. Chapter 296. Lying on the ground, the silver warhorse stared blankly at the student ID in front of it, and already didn't know what expression it should show to Wang Ling. From the student ID alone, it could already confirm two things. The first thing was that this student ID was made of real leather. The second thing was that this human cultivator in front of it was a genuine high school student. There was even a steel seal on the student ID, and there was magic power left on the steel seal. There was no way it could be wrong about this. A high school student. The silver horse's hair stood on end. Were all high school students nowadays this strong? Just how good were their meals? Wang Ling stared at the silver horse. Just as he reached out to touch its body, it involuntarily twitched and tried to stand up, but found that it was very difficult for it to do so in its current state. What do you want to do? There was fear in the silver horse's eyes, but Wang Ling didn't cause it any additional damage. He just felt for the core array pattern covering its body, and then used magic power to pull it out and directly rip it apart. The silver horse turned pale with fright once again. It was the first time it had seen something like this. This was AF*** King core array pattern. It could be considered a rather illusory object, and it contained a huge amount of spirit power. Pulling out the core array pattern, with one's bare hands, was like plugging a wet finger into an electrical outlet. Not only was this human scary, he was also very violent. This was the silver horse's second impression of Wang Ling. What should we do with these people? Looking around, Dharmaraja realized that there were still a lot of things to take care of here. The female disciples who had been knocked unconscious by the spiritual pressure, as well as the master and disciple, who had just been thrown out of the intrinsic spirit field. The moment the female elder had been thrown out, she had actually been thinking about protecting her silly disciple, and had suffered even more serious injuries. Blood was dripping from the corners of her mouth and nose, and it was likely that her primordial spirit had suffered some damage. Dharmaraja, Fatty Luo and the others blushed with shame. An itinerant immortal had been affected to this extent after being thrown out of the intrinsic spirit field. If it hadn't been for Ling Jimren's protective golden light, they would have all been seriously injured. Tie them up first, said Fatty Luo. I brought a lot of rope. No, I think it's better if you take off your women's clothes first. Grenade-throwing senior immortal stared at the two of them, the corners of his mouth twitching. When he had seen Wang Ling tear off the core array pattern, he had already been impatient to make this request. These two people in women's clothes were really too eye-catching. Sigh. It's such a rare experience. When Dharmaraja took off his female clothes, he was still a little reluctant. Grenade-throwing senior immortal. The incident at the top of the Yuntai Pavilion had temporarily come to an end, but it was not truly over. The core pattern on the silver warhorse was only a part of the ice crystal array. After cutting it off, it could not completely stop the operation of the ice crystal array. However, it could prevent the guardian spirit from regathering and its endless attacks. You have already won. With such strength, there's no need to fear the master of Immortal Mansion. The silver warhorse lay weakly on the ground, panting. It struggled to raise its eyes, and only when Wang Ling was very close to it did he realize that it actually had eyelashes. Earlier, he had also heard that slit-eyed female cultivator call it Senior Uncle Feifei. So this was probably a mare? I found traces in the palace of the master of Immortal Mansion's familiar magic array, and he had the support of the familiar. How could he have lost so easily? Grenade-throwing senior immortal asked. This person is naturally suspicious. He used the familiar to set up the restoration magic array, and after building this huge complex for Immortal Mansion, he used a spell to control the familiar to make it self-destruct. I saw it with my own eyes, there's no way I'm wrong. The silver warhorse explained slowly without the slightest hesitation. What kind of operation is this? Hearing this, grenade-throwing senior immortal was stupefied. Then, he suddenly thought of something and asked the silver horse, "Since you're a holy beast of Immortal Mansion, why would you tell us such a secret?" The silver horse was speechless, and it looked weakly at Wang Ling. "Even if I didn't say it, you would have been able to detect it, right?" That's true." Grenade-throwing senior immortal nodded. The silver horse sighed. "I'm very weak right now, and I can't even stand up. A spell like memory retrieval was like taking X-rays with modern technology. It was actually quite taxing on the brain. If you do it a few more times, with my IQ, I'm afraid I'll have to say goodbye to riding a bicycle." Grenade-throwing senior immortal. Speaking up to this point, the silver horse's eyes hesitated slightly before it said, "Also, I'm not a member of Immortal Mansion." "What do you mean?" "My silver unicorn clan used to be a glorious clan of holy beasts. But in those years, too many of our clan members died, because humans fought over the beast hearts of holy beasts. I'm the only one who survived that storm." The silver horse couldn't help sneering. "I hate the human race to the core. Why would I want to join them? Everything I did was just for revenge." Grenade-throwing senior immortal already understood a little. This reason could be said to be truly simple and crude. To put it nicely, it was cooperation. But in fact, the silver horse was borrowing Immortal Mansion's hand to take revenge on society. Of course, this silver unicorn hated humans to the bone. But there was one exception, and that was the slit-eyed female cultivator, who had fainted next to the female elder in purple. The silver unicorn looked in the direction of the slit-eyed female cultivator, then suddenly turned to Wang Ling with a pleading look in its eyes. "Please don't hurt her. I brought this girl into Immortal Mansion. This was a deal I made with the master of Immortal Mansion." "A deal?" Grenade-throwing senior immortal rubbed his chin. The silver horse said, "This girl helped me a lot, but she was also affected. She wasn't stupid before, but unfortunately her brain was damaged by the poison. The master of Immortal Mansion happens to have this kind of resource to suppress the poison in her body." "What kind of poison is it?" "It's a little complicated, and I can't explain it in a short time. I used the holy beast's blood as a catalyst, and combined it with the earth root to make her consume it once every 3 days. Only then could I guarantee that the poison wouldn't take effect." At this point, the silver horse accidentally spat out another mouthful of blood. Grenade-throwing senior immortal looked at the ground with a little pity. This was practically a pool of gold. Furthermore, when he heard the silver unicorn mention the root of the earth, he was even more alarmed, since it was a rare medicinal herb on the verge of extinction. "Brother Ling, is there a way to get rid of this poison?" After thinking for a while, Grenade-throwing senior immortal suddenly looked at Wang Ling. "You know how to detoxify it?" On the ground, the silver unicorn had an incredulous expression on its face. Then it saw Wang Ling walk in the girl's direction, a pure white light rising from his right hand. Wang Ling stretched out his hand and pressed it against the girl's forehead, activating the Great Purification spell. Wisps of black mist were expelled from the girl's ears. The whole process took less than a minute. The corners of the silver unicorn's mouth twitched. It's gone? Grenade-throwing senior immortal nodded seriously. It's gone. The silver unicorn sucked in a cold breath and stared at Wang Ling with awe in its eyes. It was clearly still very weak, but Wang Ling's handsomeness just now had impressed it, and it yelled excitedly, "Master! You're my master!" Chapter 297. It was definitely not an easy task to win the favor of a sacred beast. Grenade-throwing senior immortal had to admit that Wang Ling did indeed have a special charm. But when all was said and done, he was now facing a silver unicorn, a species that was almost impossible to encounter in today's world. If this was exposed, it might start a war. The young man in white stared at the silver unicorn in front of him and sighed. "If you want to join us, you still need to take a test." Test? The silver unicorn thought for a bit, then quickly nodded. "As long as you don't hand me over to the state, everything is fine." Grenade-throwing senior immortal. Nowadays, even holy beasts were so straightforward. But there were many times when the young man in white felt that this really depended on fate and destiny. It was very clear that fate and destiny had arrived, and it was just a choice. The young man didn't dare make the decision himself. The person this holy beast admired was Wang Ling, so the final decision was still in Wang Ling's hands. "Brother Ling, what do you think?" the young man in white asked. Wang Ling began to examine the silver unicorn. In fact, in the long river of history, there had been a lot of holy beasts who would automatically choose a reliable master to sign a contract with, in order to avoid conflicts between human cultivators. But most of the time, it had been an agreement. Holy beasts had always been very arrogant since ancient times, and it had always been the holy beasts themselves who made their own choices. The human cultivators who were chosen had almost no right to refuse. But now, the situation was exactly the opposite. In the face of absolute strength, the silver unicorn realized that it was like a sagging chested obeson, completely unattractive. The most important thing was that if it really handed itself over, it would become a silk banner. At that moment, the silver unicorn had already made up its mind that it absolutely wouldn't let this happen. "I'm actually very easy to take care of. Even if I don't eat, it's fine." The silver unicorn stared at Wang Ling, its eyes shining with sincerity. "When I'm more or less healed, I'll be able to take human form. When that time comes, I can even do the laundry and cook." Wang Ling stared at the silver unicorn for a while before withdrawing his gaze. He didn't agree on the spot, but he didn't refuse either. The silver unicorn had also discovered that the master it had chosen was a taciturn person who didn't like to talk. It could only turn its gaze to the white-robed youth and ask, "Master, what did he say?" Ling Junren didn't refuse, but he also didn't agree. In this situation, he probably wants to stay and observe first. "In other words, I still have a chance." The silver unicorn's eyes lit up. Grenade-throwing senior immortal sked, and wrote 3 English letters on the silver unicorn's blood on the ground. GCM. He then rubbed its head. The silver unicorn asked, "What does this mean?" The white-robed youth pointed at the sky in a profound manner. "This is the secret of the heavens. You have to comprehend it yourself." The silver unicorn stared at the 3 English letters and fell into deep thought. About 5 or 6 minutes later, alarmed by the earlier commotion, Immortal Toya and Silian Junren approached the top of Yuntai Pavilion. "Brother two," the white-robed youth beckoned from afar. From a distance, Immortal Toya saw the bleeding silver unicorn at the young man in white's feet, and was instantly alarmed. "I sensed the aura of a holy beast earlier. It turned out that it hadn't been an illusion." After that, this handsome man with the medicine gourd on his back stole a glance at Wang Ling, his heart filled with astonishment. That commotion just now had been so sensational. It wasn't hard to guess who had caused it. "Take a look, how are your injuries?" The white-robed youth looked at Immortal Toya. "If it's external injuries, I have top-notch medicine here that can heal them right away. As for internal injuries, I know that holy beasts have beast hearts, and can recover on their own. But it's better to take some medicine to speed up your recovery." Immortal Toya put down the gourd on his back, and with a flash of spirit light, he took out a pill the size of a wash basin. Wang Ling was startled when he saw it. What's this? The corners of grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's mouth couldn't help twitching as he thought of the pile of booger that Nez's mother had accumulated during her 3 years of pregnancy. This is a super Dahuan pill I made from 100 Dahuan pills. Immortal Toya was very proud of his pills, and he waved them in front of the silver unicorn. This is for you. Once you've recovered, just give me some blood. At that moment, the silver unicorn felt like it had boarded a pirate ship. I was wondering why everyone was gone. It turns out they're all here. On the other side, Silian Jinren looked from afar and saw that many intersect female disciples were being tied up by Fatty Luo and Dharmaraja and thrown into a magic circle. This magic circle had been drawn by Fatty Luo, using the power of Dharmaraja's godly thunder inheritance, and was extremely restrictive to prevent these female disciples from escaping. After the 100 or so female disciples were tied up and placed in the circle like hairy crabs, Fatty Luo let out a sigh of relief after putting in the last female elder in purple. It's finally done, but what are you going to do with this group of female disciples? Silian Jinren asked. Judging from the fight just now, this group of intersect female disciples doesn't seem to know what Immortal Mansion is doing in the outside world. They were sent here at a very young age to be isolated from the rest of the world and raised alone. I'm afraid they're completely unaware of the situation in the outside world, and don't know that Immortal Mansion is actually a dark force. Silian Jinren sighed. If that was the case, the situation was very complicated. Putting aside the question of who these female disciples belonged to, signing contracts to sell themselves through illegal human trafficking was a violation of the law to begin with. Fatty Luo suggested. In any case, all of Immortal Mansion's intersect female disciples are here now. We'll have to trouble Silian Jinren to take care of them later. It's better to ask a lawyer. Of course. Silian Jinren nodded. Suddenly, Fatty Luo looked around and abruptly raised his head. Then the only ones left are the master of Immortal Mansion and the elders who are hiding behind him, right? Given the scale of the earlier battle, it was impossible for the master of Immortal Mansion and the other elders to not have made a move. Most importantly, Ling Jinren had already torn away more than half of the core array pattern of the ice crystal array. If the holy array was even the slightest bit affected, it would shatter. At that time, all of Immortal Mansion's palaces would be exposed to the real world. Thus, it was impossible for the master of Immortal Mansion to not have made a move. Chapter 298. Wang Ling remembered that it had been evening when they had passed through the space wall and entered the mirror space of the ice crystal array, and it was now completely dark. Before coming to the flat roof of Yuntai Pavilion, Wang Ling had sensed the auras of a lot of people in battle, but he hadn't sensed Fang Xing's. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal spread his hands. I've been with Brother Ling the whole time. Dharmaraja and Brother Luo came together earlier, so they must be in the same team, but I haven't sensed Brother Fang Xing anywhere. Toya and I ran into each other on the way, and we didn't run into anyone before this, said Silian Jinren. What on earth are you trying to say? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was a little puzzled. It's like this. I saw someone who looked a lot like Brother Fang Xing earlier, but I wasn't sure if it was him. Silian Jinren frowned deeply. What do you mean? I just felt that this person's aura wasn't like Brother Fang Xing's at all. Brother Fang Xing's aura should be full of vitality like Ling Jinren's. But when I approached him from behind, it felt like a bone-chilling wind. Silian Jinren voiced her doubts. Maybe I was mistaken. Then what was he doing when you saw him? I saw someone who looked like Brother Fang Xing approaching a heavenly palace called Glittering Jewel Pavilion. Glittering Jewel Pavilion? The silver unicorn on the ground was very familiar with this name, and it immediately said solemnly, If that's your friend, I advise you to hurry and save him. Glittering Jewel Pavilion is the palace of Immortal Mansion's 3 core elders. Apart from Elder Purple Moon, who's lying here now, there are only 3 elders left, and none of them are easy to deal with. Can you tell me more? The silver unicorn. These three great elders are called Xia Yu, Xia Shui, and Xia Bing. Some of the female disciples in Immortal Mansion call them the 3,000 gold of the Xia family. Wang Ling already couldn't help wanting to ridicule these names. Add in Xia Donghai, and they'll really be complete. But Wang Ling didn't interrupt, and let the silver unicorn continue. These three people are a lot stronger than Elder Purple Moon, who's in charge of punishment here. They're best at using the Great Spirit-absorbing spell, which can continuously suck away the opponent's spirit energy in battle. Of course, in my eyes, these three are just three girls. I don't care about them at all, so I didn't do much research on them. What the Silverhorn Beast said was not false. After all, as a holy beast that was still alive in this world, this Silverhorn Beast had a lifespan of about 8,000 years. Not to mention these three elders. Even most of the people standing here would call this Silverhorn Beast Grandpa. Thus, when the Silver Unicorn said this, it looked at the young faces of Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal and the others around it. It seemed to feel that its words were ambiguous, and it hurriedly corrected itself. Of course, I know that human cultivators value strength above all else. Since I've already acknowledged Great God Ling as my master, I'm naturally a baby that needs to be protected. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, Immortal Toya, Lightning Dharmaraja, Silian Jinren, Fatty Luo, Wang Ling, an 8,000-year-old baby. He had never seen one before. The Silver Unicorn didn't dare speak. It also felt that acting cute like this wasn't very appropriate, so it could only silently bury its head. So big shots, please forgive me. In fact, at this very moment, another battle erupted in the Linglang Pavilion at the same time. The three elders of Linglang Pavilion were panting as they stared at the long-legged youngster in sportswear in front of them, and their expressions couldn't help changing dramatically. About half an hour ago, this youngster had rushed here alone, and without saying anything, he had directly used an intrinsic spirit field on them. All three of them were peak middle itinerant immortals, and their spirit energy sources could already be considered enormous. But even if they combined their spirit energy sources, there was no way they would be able to open up an intrinsic spirit field. To open up an intrinsic spirit field with just one person's spirit energy source, unless they reached true immortal level. Otherwise, it was impossible. Thus, the three elders who were now trapped in the intrinsic spirit field could only be described as stupefied. What shocked them the most was that this youth's intrinsic spirit field was actually a space of its own. Within this intrinsic spirit field, this youth could control gravity at will, impeding their movements in various ways. Furthermore, their great spirit-absorbing spell was only useful in close combat, and had no effect at all in the intrinsic spirit field. It's all over. Under the starlight of the intrinsic spirit field, the youngster, who was only wearing a pair of blue and white striped sports pants, smiled at the three female elders. "Who are you?" One of the female elders called Xia Yu stared at him. "I feel a sense of familiarity from the fluctuations of spirit energy in your body. Perhaps you're the son of an old friend? There's something very familiar about you. Maybe it's all just a misunderstanding." To be able to release an intrinsic spirit field on his own, the gap between them was really too big. Now the only thing the female elder could do was to use this sort of nonsense to buy as much time as possible. They couldn't break the intrinsic spirit field, but they could send a message to the outside world and ask the master of Immortal Mansion to come and rescue them. "My real name is Fang Xing. Do you recognize me?" The youngster continued to smile, and in the eyes of the three female elders, his harmless smile became especially terrifying. Very familiar." The female elder continued to spout nonsense. "My adoptive parents gave me this name not long after I was born. I've never interacted with you before, so how could you recognize me? Did you think I didn't see the signal you sent out earlier?" While the female elders were horrified, Fang Xing chuckled. "A mere master of Immortal Mansion isn't enough for me to eat. Although you haven't seen me before, you've definitely seen my dad." Under the three female elders' terrified expressions, Fang Xing narrowed his eyes, and his originally sunny face gradually darkened as he gradually lost his smile. Over the last 100 years, Immortal Mansion has done a lot of things with the ice crystal array that my dad gave you, right? You are. The three female elders' eyes widened at the same time, but before they could say anything, they felt an immense pressure weighing down on them. The youngster had just pointed his finger, and they were actually buried in the ground, with only their heads sticking out. Under this immense pressure, it was hard for them to even open their eyelids and lips. Feng Xing stepped forward, his hand turning into a spirit blade as he pointed it at the three female cultivators' heads. But I know that you aren't the culprits, so I'll give you a quick death for now. As soon as he said this, in the next moment, a heavy voice rang out in the sky. Junior, do you dare touch these three people? The three female elders couldn't speak under the immense pressure, but they couldn't help cheering in their hearts. They knew that the master of Immortal Mansion was here. This voice was mixed with pure fluctuations of magic energy, and actually directly penetrated the intrinsic spirit field. Although it didn't affect it, Feng Xing was still a little surprised. Oh, Feng Xing smiled and stared at the sky. You're finally willing to show yourself? However, the movements of his hands did not stop because of this sound. With a crack, he raised the blade and cut off a head. Chapter 299. Even the master of Immortal Mansion hadn't expected this at all. Before he could send a second telepathic message, he had already sensed that the aura of one of the female elders had completely disappeared. He had truly beheaded her in one stroke, leaving no room for negotiation at all. What was even more shocking was that this wasn't the end. Feng Xing had dealt with this very decisively. Spirit energy condensed in his palm, as he raised it again, and beheaded the second female elder. And then the third. The heavy pressure of the intrinsic spirit field dissipated, and the eyes of the three female elders' heads, that had rolled to the ground, popped open one after the other. They had died with everlasting regret, and not a single drop of blood flowed from their necks. It could only be said that not only had Feng Xing been decisive, but he had also been ferocious. The most important thing was that these three heads had belonged to itinerant immortals. Feng Xing had chopped off their heads 3 times in a row without giving them any time to breathe, as if he were chopping vegetables. This scene, no matter who saw it, would be extremely horrified. Good. You've got guts. You're courting death. Then came the master of Immortal Mansion's rage. His furious roar penetrated the intrinsic spirit field, and a moment later, the roof of Glittering Jewels Pavilion's heavenly palace outside the intrinsic spirit field was directly lifted off. With a wave of Feng Xing's hand, the intrinsic spirit field retreated, and the heads of the three female elders appeared. Just like that, their bodies would forever be buried in this intrinsic spirit field. The roof of Glittering Jewels Pavilion was lifted, and the Taoist in red and the Eastern Branch Chief from before appeared at the same time. Feng Xing shook the heads in front of them, then casually tossed them behind him. The Taoist in red and the Eastern Branch Chief next to him stung at this scene, and they gritted their teeth, their anger already boiling. In fact, the master of Immortal Mansion had been secretly observing for a long time, while Feng Xing had been fighting the three female elders. After witnessing Feng Xing's intrinsic spirit field, the master of Immortal Mansion had long since come to a conclusion about how powerful this person was. This person definitely wasn't an ordinary person, and his aura was indeed familiar. It was very likely that he was a descendant of one of the opponents he had fought before. Furthermore, he had basically already deduced this. This intrinsic spirit field isn't yours, is it? It's not a good thing to rely on an inherited intrinsic spirit field to be spoiled and arrogant. The Taoist in red stood on a cloud and looked down at Feng Xing. This question wasn't false, and Feng Xing couldn't find a reason to refute it, since this intrinsic spirit field really wasn't his. For Feng Xing, this could be considered a relic. He had already accumulated a powerful source of spirit energy inside, and the space key had been engraved into his body when he was born. When he was 5 years old, he accidentally activated it. After a long time, he learned that it was called an intrinsic spirit field. Thinking about it carefully, Feng Xing felt that his childhood had been pretty miserable. He had been like a protagonist in a novel who had picked up a cheat, and had to rely on himself to figure out everything. Even though Mr. and Mrs. Fong had given him a lot of love and care, he still couldn't accept those people who pushed his biological father step by step into the abyss for their own benefit. Historically, his father had been an absolute tragedy and a heinous person, but whether this was true or not, Fong Xing had his own conclusion. In the air, the master of Immortal Mansion continued to sneer when he saw the youngster sink into silence. Given your strength, if my 3 subordinates hadn't been careless and been sucked into your intrinsic spirit field to be suppressed, you would never have been a match for any one of them. What's the point of saying this now? Fong Xing sighed in his heart, but his face showed that familiar harmless smile again. I didn't expect you to be able to use the intrinsic spirit field to such an extent with your cultivation. However, since you've already revealed your final trump card, then the game is already over, right? The red-clothed Taoist laughed sinisterly. It was a big taboo to reveal one's trump card first in a fight. In Wang Ling's opinion, Fong Xing being able to summon an intrinsic spirit field at this realm was already his limit. These 3 female elders were all core members of Immortal Mansion, but Master of Immortal Mansion, Cheng Yu felt that their deaths weren't unjust. At the very least, he had forced this youngster to reveal his life-saving trump card, and had also consumed a lot of Fong Xing's spirit energy. Otherwise, it really would have been difficult to deal with them. Now, Cheng Yu felt that he hadn't completely lost yet. As long as he killed Fong Xing and used his secret key to enter the intrinsic spirit field to find the primordial spirits of the 3 female elders, Immortal Mansion wouldn't have truly lost this battle. The biggest advantage of itinerant immortals was that after their physical bodies were destroyed, their primordial spirits could survive for more than a month, and they wouldn't be affected by light. Although he had sensed Fong Xing chopping off the heads of the 3 female elders one by one, it was clear that he hadn't had enough time to destroy their primordial spirits. This was why Cheng Yu had hurriedly appeared here. If he hadn't, none of the 3 female elders' primordial spirits would have survived. Thinking this, Cheng Yu inexplicably felt that the outcome was a foregone conclusion. For him, Fong Xing's appearance could be considered an accident, but it could also be considered a pleasant surprise. Back then, Cheng Yu had excavated almost all of the wealth that Immortal Shi Pai had left behind, as well as some treasures that he had kept hidden, such as a godly object like the intrinsic spirit field. All these years, Cheng Yu had been searching for them, and he hadn't expected that someone would actually deliver them to his doorstep. These were the treasures that he hadn't been able to excavate from Immortal Shi Pai back then, and now, he naturally wanted to fight for them from the other party's son. For cultivators, strength was the most important thing, so those things should have belonged to him in the first place. As he was thinking, 2 dazzling balls of light interrupted his train of thought. Master of Immortal Mansion, Cheng Yu was extremely astonished. He couldn't believe that this youngster still had so much spirit energy left after his battle with the 3 female elders. He dodged to the side, and the 2 dazzling balls of light nailed themselves to the huge stone pillars supporting the palace, which immediately collapsed with a thud. Cheng Yu hadn't seen these 2 balls of light clearly, but he was 100% sure that they weren't spells or magic treasures. However, they had been too fast, and he hadn't been able to catch them at all. Too arrogant. The Eastern Branch chief gnashed his teeth and glared at Fong Xing. Master, you have to teach this person a lesson. Fong Xing smiled at him. May I ask, who do you think you are? Then he waved his hand, and the 2 balls of light that had shot out earlier instantly shot back behind him. This time, they pierced through the Eastern Branch chief's body at an extremely fast speed. Master of Immortal Mansion, Cheng Yu finally saw them clearly. These 2 balls of light were actually 2 scales, but the price for seeing them clearly was. Chapter 300. All of this happened in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint. These 2 snake scales were so fast that they moved as fast as top-notch spirit swords. It took the Master of Immortal Mansion, Cheng Yu, 2 rounds before he could see the true faces of these 2 balls of light. The Eastern Branch chief died with his eyes wide open. 2 bloody fist-sized holes appeared in his chest, and he fell directly from the smoke in the air. Chengyu stared at the youngster in front of him in utter astonishment. He couldn't believe that the other party would dare to attack so arrogantly and cut down one of his subordinates in front of him without giving him the slightest bit of face. Chengyu had his own theory about the origin of these two scales. When immortal Shipai had shocked the world back then, there had been a rumor that his entire body, including the snake scales he had cultivated, were living magic treasures. He had been called a monster, and had also been nicknamed Living Magic Treasures. This was also the main reason why immortal Shipai had been dismembered in the end. In the eyes of most people, he was a monster that couldn't be left alive. But Chengyu hadn't expected that Fangxing would actually obtain 2 more snake scales. But in his eyes, they probably weren't trump cards anymore. Although they were as powerful as a first-class holy weapon, they weren't as threatening as an intrinsic spirit field. Of course, Chengyu had his own trump cards, but he didn't want to use them in vain until he was in a critical situation. Given the current situation, he wanted to have some fun with Fangxing and try his best to see if the other party had any other magic treasures. "You're very good, I admire you." Chengyu looked down at Fangxing. "I'm interested in taking you in as my subordinate. If you're willing to surrender in battle, you can let me know at any time." As soon as he said that, Chengyu abruptly opened his eyes. Fangxing felt the scene in front of him suddenly change, and he had actually landed on a glacier. He was astonished to find that there were actually countless spirit swords sealed in the ice on all sides, as well as in the layer of ice beneath his feet. "You're not the only one with an intrinsic spirit field." Chengyu stared at him gloomily as he hovered in the air. He had already calculated what was going to happen next. After activating an intrinsic spirit field once, there was a fairly long cooldown period, and it couldn't be used again in a short period of time. Thus, he seized this opportunity to directly get rid of Fangxing in his intrinsic spirit field. The next moment he waved his hand, and the glaciers on all sides of the intrinsic spirit field began to shake. Countless spirit swords broke through the layer of ice. Hundreds of spirit swords lined up behind the red figure in the void like sardines. There were hundreds of spiritual swords, and every single one of them was extraordinary. The swords floated in the air, their blades emitting boundless spiritual light, as they quietly waited for Chengyu's next command. Although Fangxing had long since heard that the master of Immortal Mansion was a spirit sword collector, he was still shaken to see it with his own eyes. Most importantly, Fangxing felt that it would be impossible for Chengyu to seal so many spirit swords in the intrinsic spirit field on his own. "You should have sensed that my intrinsic spirit field has the same restoration law as the buildings outside. The familiar I summoned before did it for me, and the intrinsic spirit field was also created for me. But after I was done using it, I had it commit suicide." Chengyu laughed sinisterly, a little proud of himself in his words. Fangxing understood, making a familiar work for him, and then coveting the other party's strength after making it commit suicide. This was indeed the master of Immortal Mansion's usual style. But Fangxing's expression didn't change much. Although he was greatly shocked by the appearance of this intrinsic spirit field, the key issue now wasn't the intrinsic spirit field, but the restoration law within it. Anyone who faced an indestructible spirit field would feel a sense of despair. Without saying anything else, Chengyu gave Fangxing a look as a command. Instantly, dozens of spirit swords flew out from behind him and stabbed at Fangxing at full speed. These spirit swords danced in the air, their hilts leaving long trails of spirit light behind them. The whole scene was even more shocking than an airplane flight show. Fangxing didn't dare be careless, and more snake scales appeared in his hands as he fought these spirit swords. In the blink of an eye, the air was filled with the sound of colliding metal. However, no matter how many snake scales he only had 10 at most. If Chengyu launched an attack like the 100 Swords demonstration, he wouldn't be able to resist at all. He could only blame this intrinsic spirit field sword array for being too freakish. Fangxing had taken everything into account, but he hadn't expected the master of Immortal Mansion to actually have this trick up his sleeve. He was well aware that if he continued to exhaust himself like this, he would be the first to fall in the end. This intrinsic spirit field had the restoration law and wouldn't break easily. Although these frozen spirit swords seemed to be placed in random positions, they had in fact been meticulously arranged according to various sword arrays. The array caster only needed to move a finger, or give a meaningful look, and these swords would automatically attack in the form of a sword array. Thus Chengyu, the master of Immortal Mansion, had been watching the fight from the start, as if he were watching a show. There were more than 1,000 spirit swords in this intrinsic spirit field, and none of them were of inferior quality. These 100 spirit swords that had been summoned were just the tip of the iceberg. Chengyu looked relaxed as he floated in the air. The most exaggerated thing was that the cloud he was standing on was actually an extremely rare incorporeal spirit sword. Even the hilt couldn't be seen. Stepping on this incorporeal spirit sword gave him the visual effect of floating in the air. In the past, flying without the help of a magic treasure was something that only a powerful fighter could do. But in the current era of the spirit energy information, only a true immortal could do it. Chengyu raised his hand lightly, and dozens of spirit swords flew out. He even looked at Feng Xing with a teasing expression. "How about it? Do you want to surrender?" At that moment, there were more than 100 spirit swords pointed at Feng Xing. With one more command, these spirit swords would fly out at the same time at Feng Xing and turn him into a sieve. The 10 snake scales alone were no longer enough to stop the fierce collective attack of these 100 spirit swords. "Do you think this is my only trump card?" Feng Xing suddenly raised his head and stared at him with a smile. "I'll give you time to bring out your trump card." Chengyu sneered. In his opinion, Feng Xing was already at his wit's end. In the next moment, Feng Xing bit his lip and actually swallowed the 10 snake scales circling around him. With a hum, the youngster's skeleton actually shrank a little, her hair gradually grew longer, and battle tattoos gradually appeared on her neck. The most frightening thing was the black armor that had formed over her body. Black spirit light lingered around her voluptuous body to form an impenetrable light membrane. Master of Immortal Mansion, Chengyu's expression finally changed at this scene. Chapter 301. Master of Immortal Mansion, Chengyu subconsciously realized that he had been a little overconfident. He recalled an old saying, "Villains die from talking too much." For some reason, after seeing Feng Xing use 2 supreme spells in a row, Chengyu had a vague feeling that death was about to come. Chengyu had never expected Immortal Shi Pai to actually do so many things before his death. Not only had he left the snake scales and intrinsic spirit field to Feng Xing, he had even passed on the White Knight spell. The most frightening thing was that Feng Xing had even learned the immortal mode. These 2 spells hadn't been created by the same person, but they were extremely compatible, and when used together, the 2 spells worked like a perpetual motion machine. The armor of the White Knight spell was originally created by condensing the spirit energy of heaven and earth. As long as there was spirit energy, the armor wouldn't be destroyed. The most monstrous thing was that this Dao spell completely ignored the terrain and wasn't restricted by the intrinsic spirit field at all. Using the immortal mode as a foundation for this spell ensured that the spirit energy would circulate endlessly. In a sense, it was like a perpetual motion machine, which would increase one's battle strength dramatically. The White Knight spell was Immortal Shi Pai's famous technique, which had shocked the world for a while, but very few people had seen him use it with their own eyes. Now that Feng Xing had inherited this spell and was using it again, Chengyu was truly amazed. Furthermore, there was one thing that Chengyu hadn't expected. When the White Knight spell switched between the 2 forms of armor, it would actually change gender at the same time. At that moment, Feng Xing stood in the intrinsic spirit field, her slender body motionless as she stared fixedly in front of her. She was like the embodiment of darkness. Her entire body was shrouded in a black light that resembled a chaotic mist. Even her hair was dyed jet black, and her exquisite face looked as if it had been carved from jade. Even if this kind of demeanor couldn't be considered unparalleled, it was at the very least unparalleled among her peers. This was how Feng Xing should have been. "I thought I didn't need to use this move to deal with you." Feng Xing raised her head and spoke in a girl's voice, which was a little callous. "Impudent. I'll get rid of you right now." The master of Immortal Mansion, Chengyu raised his hand, and in a flash, hundreds of spirit swords shot out. Now that the situation had completely reversed, the longer it dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for him. Chengyu could totally imagine how powerful the White Knight spell and immortal mode were. In fact, he was even stronger than he had imagined. He could feel Fangxing's aura skyrocketing. Hundreds of spirit swords bombarded her body with a metallic clang, but they couldn't penetrate the dark triumph armor, which had been strengthened by the two spells. She was like a black swan in a sea of swords as she swam proudly. Finally, without the aid of any magic treasures, he soared into the sky. True immortal, Chengyu's expression finally changed drastically. He had not expected that the boost from the two techniques would be so great for Fangxing. He had reached the level of a true immortal, and was now able to fly through the air with his own strength. Under the dual effects of dark victory mode and immortal mode, not only did the surface of his body form a dark armor, even his aura had reached an extremely terrifying level. Hundreds of spirit swords chased after Fangxing, but Fangxing's aura shook in midair, and the formation of the spirit swords was instantly scattered. In the end, Chengyu actually saw her stretch out her hand to directly intercept several of the spirit swords chasing after her, and she crushed them in her hand. Then, this master of immortal mansion couldn't help clutching his chest as he fought back the blood that was surging out of him. Every spirit sword in the intrinsic spirit field had a contract with him. Once they were damaged, they would suffer a punitive backlash that would return to him. After Fangxing crushed more than 10 spirit swords in a row, Chengyu felt as if his chest was in a sea of fire, and his internal organs were about to melt on the spot. Although he didn't vomit blood on the spot, he was in so much pain that he wished he were dead. It was as if he had to suffer in silence. However, this insignificant pain only lasted for a moment. He gritted his teeth as his hatred for Fangxing soared. No matter what, he was going to kill Fangxing in this battle today. He raised his hand to recall the spirit swords, and all the attacking spirit swords flew back behind him to line up like sardines. Chengyu knew that these spirit swords weren't enough to contend with Fangxing, who was supported by 2 super spells. If they continued fighting, all he would do was break a few more of his treasured spirit swords. Furthermore, he would suffer a continuous backlash, which was very disadvantageous to him. "You're not going to continue?" Fangxing smiled as a young girl. But unlike the sunny smile of a teenager, there was a hint of wickedness in her smile, which made Chengyu feel uneasy. "My friend's spirit sword is still with you, right? When will it return it?" Fangxing asked as she stared at him. "All the spirit swords in the world will submit to me, so your friend's spirit sword will be mine sooner or later," said Chengyu. Fangxing frowned. At that moment, she only had one thought in her mind, and that was to strangle this Chinibu to death as soon as possible. Standing in the air, Chengyu smiled sinisterly. "That wooden sword is very special. I'm willing to call the sword spirit inside the sword the most powerful sword spirit I've ever seen. The only pity is that the blade is too weak, and it doesn't have a scabbard. This kind of sword isn't perfect enough. I'm thinking of a way to make it perfect." Floating in the air, Fangxing's eyes narrowed. "What did you do to Lord Jinka? So he's called Jinka? I'm looking for an outstanding smith to refine his sword spirit body, and fuse it with the peerless godly sword I forged." Chengyu laughed cruelly. "Also, you actually call him Lord? That's too ridiculous. Since ancient times, the sword spirits of spirit swords have only served cultivators. They can't be called living beings at all. They're just tools." Fangxing frowned deeply. She begged to differ. "He was suppressed by my spirit-subduing flags and trapped in my magic treasure. After coming to my immortal mansion, I added a new sealing formula to the spirit-subduing flags, and even used the holy array pattern. I've cut off his connection with the original owner for the time being," Chengyu said, "so there's no way he can escape. As for now, I want you to see my unfinished masterpiece." As he spoke, Chengyu waved his hand, and a green longsword broke through the top of an iceberg and flew into his hand like a shooting star. Chapter 302. This is the heavenly materials sword I'm proud of. Cheng-Yu's eyes finally revealed his confidence as he gripped the green sword. Facing him, Fang Xing was also startled by the sword chi in the sword. She felt that it was very special, and there was something strange about it that she couldn't put into words. Very quickly, Fang Xing realized what was strange about it. It was hollow and didn't have a sword spirit at all. It didn't have a sword spirit, but it could be said to be a top-notch spirit sword, in terms of material and workmanship. This was the first time Fang Xing had seen a spirit sword without a sword spirit. This is the perfect empty shell I've created, but it lacks a soul. Cheng-Yu raised his fingers and slowly slid them over the blade. Sword chi followed the movement of his fingers and burst forth with an astonishing aura, as massive spirit power surged forth like a tide. Fang Xing was shocked. With the White Knight spell and immortal mode, she had just barely reached the level of a true immortal, and she could clearly sense the nomological power surging through the sword. This was actually a nomological sword. Staring at the sword, and recalling what Master of Immortal Mansion Cheng-Yu had said about the familiar, Fang Xing suddenly thought of something. If that was really the case, then this familiar really could be said to be the most tragic one in history. After doing so much for its master, it had been forced to commit suicide in the end. To be able to become a familiar, it had to have been a big shot in ancient times. Anyone who had died in such a tragic way would have been too ashamed to face their descendants and elders. Apart from its immense power, the most important thing about this heavenly materials sword is that it has been infused with the nomological power of recovery, so it's indestructible. Cheng-Yu opened his hand and let the spirit sword float in his palm. If one looked closely, they would see that the hilt of the sword was actually studded with diamonds. This was something Cheng-Yu had deliberately left out. Otherwise he would have thought it a little too ostentatious. His heavenly materials sword had taken 100 years just to make the hilt, and the diamonds on the hilt had all been certified by experts in South Africa. Every single one of them was a real diamond. 8 stars, 8 arrows. This sword of mine has never been bathed in blood since it was forged. Today, I'll use your blood as a sacrifice. Cheng-Yu sneered. He was majestic and intimidating. However, when he spoke, he had a Chinibu tone that no one knew from which novel he had learned it. Of course, the heavenly materials sword in Cheng-Yu's hand was indeed a huge deterrent. At the very least, Fang Xing's expression was no longer as relaxed as before. Go! Manipulating the heavenly materials sword, he turned it into a streak of green light that approached from afar, then became blurry and invisible. The speed of this sword far exceeded Fang Xing's expectations, and was on a completely different level from the hundreds of spirit swords that had appeared before. In the air, Fang Xing's aura swelled again as it rose to another level. Previously, she had held back and purposely did not release all of her power. But now, in her maiden state, Fang Xing felt a strong sense of threat from this sword. She tried her best to catch it with her eyes. In the first round of attacks, the heavenly materials sword had turned into a sword light that almost brushed past her snow-white earlobe, sweeping away a few inches of her black hair. In the face of this sword, the aura barrier created by 2 super spells was completely useless. Don't run. Even if you break your legs and scream your lungs out, no one will come to save you. Floating in the air, Cheng-Yu manipulated the heavenly materials sword to chase after the girl. Fang Xing cursed inwardly. Although her defense was impregnable, she was in someone else's intrinsic spirit field. Although the immortal mode and the White Knight spell were 2 super spells with perpetual motion, they weren't completely devoid of energy. If she couldn't find a way to break through, it was very likely that she would die of exhaustion in the end. The immortal mode consumed far more physical strength than spirit energy. Thus, as she dodged the heavenly materials sword, Fang Xing was also looking for a way to break it. Her hands formed a lotus seal, and in the blink of an eye, dozens of magic seals appeared in front of her, condensing and then shattering like fireworks. A moment later, the scales that had been firmly embedded in the dark armor unexpectedly turned into 10 shadow daggers that surrounded the heavenly materials sword. The dark armor created by the White Knight spell couldn't only be used for defense, but also as a last resort to attack. It was also a major weakness of the White Knight spell, because once the scales on the armor turned into shadow daggers for attack, the overall defense would be greatly reduced. But Feng Xing could also see that Chengyu wasn't able to use the other spirit swords as he pleased while controlling the heavenly materials sword. The reason for this was very simple. The heavenly materials sword didn't have a sword spirit. Without the support of a sword spirit contract, it would be difficult to maintain such a high degree of precision control by relying solely on the magic treasure contract. Thus, when Chengyu took out the heavenly materials sword, it was tantamount to giving up on using the intrinsic spirit field. Right now, the intrinsic spirit field was the same as an unbreakable barrier that was used to trap Feng Xing. Thus, in this situation, sacrificing some defense and using the dark armor's shadow daggers to slow down the heavenly materials sword's advance, then waiting for an opportunity to attack its owner. This was the best method the girl could think of. But in the next moment, to the girl's astonished gaze, the heavenly materials sword actually split into two. One of them tangled with the 10 shadow daggers, while the other stabbed directly at her with unstoppable destructive sword chi. She had been tricked. Feng Xing clenched her teeth. She hadn't expected Chengyu to have actually calculated to this extent. He had deliberately made her sacrifice the dark armor's defense in order to expose a flaw in her originally impregnable defense. Feng Xing's expression changed. The sword had directly pierced her right collarbone and nailed her to the glacier in the distance. Blood flowed down the wound, and drops of blood fell on the ice like blood lotuses before freezing into blood ice. Feng Xing coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood. After being hit by the heavenly materials sword, she had been shaken to her core. Looking inside her jade mansion, she realized that the sword chi had actually borrowed the circulation of spirit energy produced by the White Knight spell and immortal mode to penetrate deep into her meridians and wreak havoc. She was now in a dilemma. If she allowed the two super spells to continue, the sword chi would slowly wear down her insides. The only solution was to undo the two spells at the same time. But then she would lose the ability to fight. Feng Xing knelt on the ice and gritted her teeth as she painfully undid the two spells. The dark light lingering around him completely dissipated, and he returned to his youthful appearance. The corners of his mouth and chest were stained with blood, which trickled down the corners of his mouth. In the end, you're still too young. You're still lacking in wisdom to avenge your father. In the air, Chengyu's smug laughter rang out. To him, everything was already over. He laughed sinisterly as he stared at Feng Xing. Since you've let me have my fun, I'll grant you one last sword strike. But just as he said this, the space in front of Feng Xing actually split open, and a child in brown clothes and a white robe slowly walked out. He didn't make a move, but merely gave him a meaningful look. In the air, the heavenly materials sword that had been about to stab Feng Xing directly changed direction halfway. Chapter 303. 15 minutes ago. When Wang Ling and the others arrived at Glittering Jewel's pavilion, they realized that Feng Xing wasn't there, and that the Taoist in red who had landed earlier had disappeared. An intrinsic spirit field. After sensing the surrounding environment, the silver unicorn immediately made its own inference. The intrinsic spirit field has a special magnetic field that can only be sensed by someone who also has an intrinsic spirit field. There's no mistake. After Immortal Toya's treatment feast, coupled with the silver unicorn's extremely strong self-healing ability, it was able to walk again in a short period of time. The narrow-eyed girl was still sleeping on its back. So, the red-robed Taoist who flipped the roof of this palace wasn't an illusion? Dharmaraja asked. When they had rushed here earlier, they had sensed the aura of battle from a distance on the flat roof of Yuntai Pavilion. At that time, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had been the first to see a Taoist in red blow up the roof of a heavenly palace in the distance. At that time, the red-clothed Taoist's flustered and exasperated expression was exactly the same as the emoji on the internet. Asterisk 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 asterisk. That person is the master of Immortal Mansion Chengyu. The silver unicorn narrowed its eyes. But I didn't expect him to also have an intrinsic spirit field. At this point, the silver unicorn suddenly felt a little sad. It required a cultivator's accumulation of spiritual energy over a long period of time. Without sufficient spiritual energy, everything else was just empty talk. In order to develop an intrinsic spirit field, it had gone through a long period of cultivation. But now the establishment of intrinsic spirit fields was as easy as opening a vegetable market. Even an itinerant immortal could do it. It was a little unscientific. In the glittering jewels pavilion, a group of people sat on the ground. The roof of the palace that had been destroyed by the red-clothed Taoist was being repaired at a speed visible to the naked eye under the effect of the restoration law. Wang Ling sat cross-legged on the ground and opened his heavenly eye. He exerted his heavenly eye to the extreme, and his gaze focused on the void. Finally, the image of the intrinsic spirit field was projected, and it was completely projected in the void. The silver unicorn was so shocked that its hair stood on end. It turned out that the third eye could actually see inside the intrinsic spirit field. How come it didn't know about this? Looking at the silver unicorn's shocked expression, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help laughing. Brother Ling's heavenly eye is very special. It can pierce through the void. That's what we often call seeing through appearances to see the essence. This might be a bit complicated to explain. You know about radio, right? The silver unicorn, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. Brother Ling's heavenly eye is like a radio that can adjust the frequency. Next to him, Immortal Toya hurriedly chimed in. So, this is actually normal for Senior Ling. Sit down. Don't be too surprised. If it wasn't for the sacred beast's image as an idol, the silver unicorn would have cursed out loud. It seriously suspected that it had been living in a dog's stomach for the past 8,000 years. As expected of his master, he was indeed powerful. The scene changed, and everyone saw the scene inside the intrinsic spirit field. The Taoist in red was engaged in a fierce battle with a young girl. Everyone was astonished at this scene. Dharmaraja, Fatty Luo, and the others all had their mouths agape. They saw that even Ling Jinren's paralyzed expression had turned into one of deep thought. This is this brother Fangxing? How did he suddenly turn into such a cute little girl? Dharmaraja sucked in a cold breath. It turned out that the strongest cross-dressing big shot among them was here. In the image projected by the heavenly eye, at that moment, the girl Fangxing was using the combined power of 2 super spells to fight against hundreds of spirit swords on her own. And she even had the upper hand. It was a ghastly sight. And at the same time, it was the first time that everyone had seen Fangxing in this form. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal frowned. I never knew Brother Fangxing had this side to him. But what on earth is going on? He was a little confused. The little brother he had known for several years had suddenly become a little sister. This wasn't just a visual shock, but also a spiritual one. This is indeed Brother Fangxing. Salian Jinren was very knowledgeable. Also, this is probably the White Knight spell, which made Immortal Shipai famous back then. Coupled with Immortal Jinyuan's famous immortal mode back then. This is the effect of the combination of these 2 super spells. Gazing at the image, the silver unicorn couldn't help shivering. It finally knew why these 3 core female elders of Immortal Mansion had suddenly died. The girl in the image was strong enough. With the support of these 2 super spells, she had just barely reached true immortal level. Even 10 itinerant immortals might not necessarily be able to deal with a true immortal. Furthermore, the silver unicorn could sense the power of the intrinsic spirit field from this girl. It was very clear that she was also someone with an intrinsic spirit field. It was likely that before she had fought the master of Immortal Mansion, she had already used the intrinsic spirit field to deal with the 3 elders of Immortal Mansion. And while the intrinsic spirit field was on cooldown, the master of Immortal Mansion had dragged her into the next battle. Even if the silver unicorn hadn't said anything, most of the people here had already guessed this. Gazing at the image, Salian Jinren sighed. Senior Immortal said before that Brother Fangxing had been fostered since he was young, and I've been trying to figure out his background all this time. Now it seems that he really isn't a simple person. He is Immortal Shipai's posthumous son, and looking at his current situation, he should have inherited some of Immortal Shipai's core strength. A lot of people here turn pale with shock at this deduction. If that's the case, then everything makes sense. Speaking up to this point, Saoyan Jimran sighed deeply. She knew a lot about what had happened back then. Back then, a lot of media outlets believed that immortal Shipai had been instigated to go astray. Now, it seems that the instigator was this master of Immortal Mansion. When all was said and done, this was a long-standing grudge between the master of Immortal Mansion and Feng Xing. It was just that this time, Feng Xing had taken this opportunity to completely explode. At that moment, the initially silent silver unicorn suddenly cried out in alarm. When it saw Chengyu, the master of Immortal Mansion, take out his heavenly materials sword, its pupils instantly contracted. I've seen this sword before. It's a spirit sword that the master of Immortal Mansion spent 100 years to create. It's very strange. I'm afraid your friend is in danger. Wang Ling looked up at the image in front of him and gazed calmly at Feng Xing in her maiden form. Wang Ling didn't think he had been involved in the various crimes that Immortal Shipai had committed back then. And the only things he knew about them were from old antiques history lessons. In fact, he wasn't qualified to judge anything at all. Wang Ling didn't say he liked Feng Xing, but he didn't say he hated her either. As for her sticking to him, Wang Ling felt that it was probably an ill-fated relationship that he had accidentally offended when he had killed Loopy Toad back then. Thus, staring at the image, Wang Ling heaved a long sigh in his heart. This ill-fated relationship could only be slowly settled in the future. No matter what happened in the future, right now Feng Xing was still his brother. Brother Ling, do you have a way? Brother Feng Xing, he can't hold on much longer. Grenade-throwing senior immortal shouted anxiously. At that moment, Feng Xing had already ended his two-stage spell and was gradually reverting to his youthful appearance. The silver unicorn's eyes narrowed deeply. If we want to save him, we have to break the intrinsic spirit field. But that's too difficult. It's not difficult at all. Fatty Luo became excited. Lord Jinka can definitely do it. This is Ling Junren's spirit sword. Master's spirit sword. The silver unicorn was blank for a moment. It's the Peachwood spirit sword that the master of Immortal Mansion took away a while ago, Fatty Luo explained. The silver unicorn was suddenly enlightened. But I remember. The master of Immortal Mansion has already sealed that sword heavily. Hearing this, the corners of Wang Ling's mouth couldn't help twitching. You want to seal Jinka with that kind of broken seal? Hey young. Chapter 304. Brown sword light poured out of the dark space tunnel and illuminated the entire glacier of the spirit field. It could be said that Jinka's appearance was completely beyond Chengyu and Feng Xing's expectations, because logically speaking, it was impossible to open up a space inside an intrinsic spirit field. This was just a sword spirit. Master of Immortal Mansion Chengyu's eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. He had clearly already sealed this sword spirit. The layers of seals were so thick that even ghosts and gods shouldn't be able to escape. Under their astonished gazes, Jinka walked out of the brown light. He was still wearing the same white robe and brown robe, and still had the same short white hair. He hadn't made a move, and had only given him a meaningful glance. In the air, the heavenly materials sword that had been about to stab him directly changed direction halfway. Then it abruptly shot toward Chengyu, the master of Immortal Mansion. Chengyu's face turned pale. With just a glance, Jinka had actually forcibly changed his command. This was a magic treasure that he had signed a contract with. Chengyu's expression finally changed as he watched the heavenly materials sword stab at him. His repeated commands didn't have the slightest effect. In a moment of desperation, he could only bite the tip of his tongue and use his blood essence as a medium to perform a hand seal, forcing the power of the contract to restrain the spirit sword. In the end, the heavenly materials sword stopped in front of him, and he pretended to spit out a mouthful of blood. Using the power of blood essence to perform a hand seal, to force the power of the contract to restrain the spirit sword would damage the contract. Usually, under the conditions of a magic treasure's contract, this kind of command could only be used 3 times, and it would result in a violent backlash. Once these 3 times were over, the contract between him and the magic treasure would be severed, and he would have to sign a new contract. It could be said that this was a disadvantage of the heavenly materials, sword not having a sword spirit inside, which was why the power of the contract was so easily shaken. Although master of a mortal mansion, Cheng Yu had already anticipated this when he had forged the sword back then. When the contract was unstable, there might indeed be one or two instances where the spirit sword wouldn't listen to his command. Thus, whenever he took out the heavenly materials sword, Cheng Yu always concentrated his mental energy to ensure that his command was accurate. However, Cheng Yu had never imagined that his orders would actually be changed halfway through his orders. How did you get out? Although Cheng Yu was in midair, he looked at the brown-robed and white-robed Zheng Tai on the ground. He only felt that his footsteps were light, as if he was about to fall. In the face of this completely unreasonable power, Cheng Yu felt a trace of fear. On the ground, there wasn't the slightest change in Jinka's expression as he tilted his head and looked at Wang Ling. Is it very difficult? He spoke very slowly, almost enunciating every word. His tone was filled with tiredness and a little arrogance. He didn't take him seriously at all. Impudent, Cheng Yu let out a shrill roar, his voice shaking the sky and shaking the icebergs in the intrinsic spirit field. Countless blades of wind seemed to blow in the air, carrying the broken ice of the spirit field in all directions. And this was just the aftermath of the screech. The real energy was all concentrated on Jinka. Jinka's face was as unruffled as an ancient well. He didn't even blink as he stood in front of Fang Xing, and all the ice shards that had come howling at him were blocked by the 10-foot sword qi that had risen up on its own. Nothing could get close to him within this 10-foot radius. Fang Xing lay on his side on the ground and clutched his right shoulder above his collarbone as he struggled to regulate his breathing. That sword just now had almost pierced his heart. If Jinka hadn't appeared in time to stop Cheng Yu from stabbing him one last time, he would have died long ago. The storm caused by the screech raged for a long time, and Jinka's white robe flapped in the wind. After a full 2 minutes, the storm finally died down. Jinka straightened his clothes and sighed deeply in his heart. Young people nowadays were really getting harder and harder to deal with. The standoff was still going on. Cheng Yu landed on the ground and put away his incorporeal spirit sword. Because of Jinka's appearance, he didn't even dare fly anymore. He was well aware that now wasn't the time to pretend to be a big-tailed wolf. He had to concentrate and go all out to ensure that there wouldn't be a situation where the command would be changed halfway through. But given the current situation, Cheng Yu didn't dare continue using the heavenly materials sword. Without a sword spirit inside the sword, the risk was too great. Thus, after landing, Cheng Yu put away the heavenly materials sword and once again used the power of the intrinsic spirit field. All the spirit swords sealed in the glaciers of this intrinsic spirit field had sword spirits, and he had signed contracts with them, so they were relatively stable when he used them. This time, he had to defeat the other party in one go and not give him any chance to turn things around. Demonstration of 100 swords. Cheng Yu grit his teeth and directly activated the 100 swords. Countless spirit swords broke out of the glaciers like butterflies. He didn't even have time to summon them to his side. As soon as they broke through the ice, they turned into meteors that shot toward Jinka. From Fang Xing's point of view, this attack this time could be said to be shocking enough. It could be said that Cheng Yu was going all out. With all his might, he used all his might to control these spirit swords, turning them into large meteors that smashed down. This time, none of the hundreds of spirit swords turned back, and each one hit the bullseye. Full power. After realizing that the attack was effective, Cheng Yu was wild with joy and immediately made a decision. With a wave of his hand, he manipulated even more spirit swords to break through the ice and attack Jinka in unison. Nearly 1,000 spirit swords continued to attack, bombarding for more than 3 minutes before they finally stopped. Master of a mortal mansion, Cheng Yu stood in the distance, gasping for breath as he waited for the ice fog to disperse after the bombardment. However, unexpectedly, there were still 2 figures in the ice fog. Cheng Yu's heart trembled, and he immediately made a hand seal to try to summon back the 1,000 spirit swords he had just released. Unexpectedly, none of them responded. How could this be? Why couldn't he feel the connection between him and these spirit swords? Chengyu stared in front of him in horror. Gradually, he saw the layers of ice fog recede, and the 1,000 spirit swords he had just shot out were all lying on the ground in disorder. Jinka was still standing in his original position, unmoving. He looked straight ahead and took a deep breath. Facing the thousands of spiritual swords lying on the ground, he gave his first command. "You know what to do, right?" Almost in an instant, the 1,000 spirit swords rose in response, their tips extremely neat, as they all pointed in Chengyu's direction. Chapter 305. In that instant, Chengyu, the master of a mortal mansion, finally experienced what true despair felt like. His eyes were deeply sunken, and at this moment, he looked as if he had aged several decades. Even his hair had instantly turned white. In that short instant just now, the thousands of spiritual swords had actually severed the contract with him at the same time. It was as if his jade mansion was in a sea of magma and fire, and he was in infinite pain. Chengyu now understood a little what kind of person he was facing. If summoning a familiar back then was a lucky chance bestowed upon him by the heavens, then the person standing in front of him now was a genuine pay-to-win player. At that moment, Chengyu finally realized that this was a meaningless fight, because he had no chance of winning from the very beginning. "What on earth are you?" The moment Chengyu vomited blood from the backlash of the spirit sword contract being severed, Jinka gave him a meaningful look. The expression on his face remained unchanged, and his dead fish eyes, which he had inherited from Wang Ling, looked extremely lifelike in that moment. Then, the 1,000 spirit swords behind Jinka gave off a hum, as they shone with light, as dazzling as the stardust in the Milky Way. After that, Jinka saw the master of Immortal Mansion's humiliated gaze. A Grand Peak late itinerant immortal, the bishop of a top dark force, had actually ended up like this. Chengyu grit his teeth. He knew that he had nowhere to run. The backlash from the broken contract between these 1,000 spirit swords was still going on. Gritting his teeth, he made a hand seal, and instantly ended the intrinsic spirit field. These 1,000 spirit swords had been sealed in the field by the familiar he had summoned earlier. In theory, as long as he could end the intrinsic spirit field, the concentrated attack of these 1,000 spirit swords wouldn't reach him. After that, as long as he used a spirit talisman to escape, he would at least be able to escape alive. As for revenge, that was a matter for another time. As long as he could live, anything was possible. Every time before a battle, Chengyu would plan a way out for himself, but he never expected this day to come so soon. Before he could fulfill his dream of creating a peerless godly sword, he had already been beaten up in his intrinsic spirit field. If word of this got out, he would definitely be laughed at for 10,000 years. It would be the biggest joke in the world. But no matter how much people laughed at him, it was better to be alive than dead. Thus, Chengyu's hand speed was practically faster than any of his previous hand seals as he swiftly completed this one, for fear that Jinka would launch an attack while he was doing it. Success! The moment the seal was completed, Chengyu couldn't help but smile. He spat out a mouthful of blood and watched the intrinsic spirit field in front of him slowly disappear. In fact, the moment Chengyu made the hand seal, Jinka had already seen it. If he wanted to, Chengyu's hands would be chopped off in an instant. However, he did not do so, because the task Wang Ling had given him this time was just to control these 1,000 spirit swords as the king of sword spirits. Now his mission was complete. Jinka was well aware that his little master Ling had always been a man of his word. If little master Ling didn't tell him what to do and Jinka crossed the line, little master Ling would be angry. When Ling Jinren got angry, the consequences were very serious. In Glittering Jewels Pavilion, when grenade-throwing senior immortal saw master of Immortal Mansion Chengyu seal the intrinsic spirit field on the screen, he quickly realized that the other party might use an escape talisman to escape. "Should we set up an array?" Fatty Luo asked. In a situation like this, using an array to seal off the space and stop the talisman from being released normally was a relatively good idea. Almost the instant Dharmaraja saw the intrinsic spirit field end, His hands instantly flashed with lightning, as he directly used the godly thunder inheritance to seal off all the entrances to Glittering Jewel's pavilion. If Chengyu tried to force his way out, he would have to endure the godly thunder inheritance. Dharmaraj's godly thunder inheritance might not have had any effect on Chengyu when he was at his peak, but he would definitely be electrocuted if he tried to escape in his current state. No matter what, he has nowhere to go. Dharmaraja smiled, very confident in the power of his godly thunder inheritance. Even Pikachu wouldn't be able to escape the blockade of 10 layers of the godly thunder inheritance. Don't be careless. Silian Junran had a faint bad feeling. This master of a mortal mansion has endless tricks up his sleeves. The holy ice crystal array is still active, so he might have more than one talisman to cover his escape. I agree. Grenade-throwing senior immortal nodded. Everyone keep a close eye on him. We can't let him escape again. At this time, the silver unicorn sighed. It's a pity that I've already used my intrinsic spirit field. Otherwise, when he withdraws from his intrinsic spirit field, I'll use my own spiritual field to trap him like a nesting doll. That's the safest way. No matter how many tricks he has, he can't escape. Wang Ling's eyes suddenly lit up at the silver unicorn's suggestion. But at that moment, everyone's attention was focused on Chengyu in the image, and no one noticed Ling Junren's expression. After that, Wang Ling slowly got up. Spirit light flickered in his hand, and everyone saw that Jinka had already returned to his hand in the form of a peachwood sword. Then, Fangxing also appeared, and Immortal Toya directly strode over to help him to one side for emergency treatment. Only the master of Immortal Mansion was left. Everyone held their breaths as they waited for Chengyu to appear. Wang Ling could already imagine that the moment Chengyu appeared, everyone's aura would wrap around him, and they would do everything they could to stop him from leaving. In fact, Wang Ling had already thought of a way to deal with the master of Immortal Mansion. After the intrinsic spirit field ended, those who didn't possess it would be the first to be evacuated, so Chengyu would appear a little later. But that was no longer important, because the moment Chengyu's figure reappeared in Glittering Jewel's pavilion, everyone saw Wang Ling step forward, his red and black jacket fluttering gently in the wind. In the next moment, the scene in front of everyone actually changed once again. They came to a square and saw an old stone sculpture. Next to it were a dozen or so palm trees that were nearing the end of their lives that hadn't fallen down. Fangxing couldn't be more familiar with this scene, because this was number 60 high school. What's going on? Master of Immortal Mansion Chengyu turned pale with fright. He couldn't be more familiar with this feeling. This was an intrinsic spirit field. He had just emerged from his own spirit field, and had even taken out his spirit talisman. But in the end, he had been sucked in by another intrinsic spirit field. The silver unicorn turned pale with fright. Through the magnetic field, it could sense that this was a brand new intrinsic spirit field, and its spirit energy was incomparably pure. The corners of Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's mouth couldn't help twitching as he stared at Wang Ling. Brother Ling, is this your intrinsic spirit field? Wang Ling nodded his head. In the end, all of them were gobsmacked. What? When did Ling Junren open up an intrinsic spirit field? Wang Ling was silent at this question, but in the end, he didn't say it out loud for fear of damaging everyone's confidence in cultivation. Because he had just learned this intrinsic spirit field just a minute ago. This could be seen from the modeling of the scene. Chapter 306. The construction of the intrinsic spirit field was actually a complicated subject. The source of spiritual power was the key, and the tree trunk could be divided into multiple complicated branching routes. In addition to the spiritual power origin, modeling was also very important. After his previous fight with the silver unicorn, and his careful observation of the intrinsic spirit field, which Master of Immortal Mansion, Chengyu had released this time, Wang Ling had been meticulously making all kinds of calculations and summaries in these two battles. He could even solve a difficult high school chemistry question like a talisman and a seal script in 3 minutes. Analyzing the formula for constructing an intrinsic spirit field was only a matter of minutes. Chengyu, the master of Immortal Mansion, knelt on the ground in despair, his face ashen. He knew he couldn't escape. If he was trapped in someone else's intrinsic spirit field, he wouldn't be able to use any talismans, unless he had a powerful magic weapon that could destroy the field. However, with his crippled body, what could he do now? Master of Immortal Mansion, do you have anything else to say? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal stared at Chengyu. Chengyu opened his mouth, but no words came out. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal looked at him calmly. You have the right to remain silent, but whatever you say next will be used against you in court. It could be said that all the people standing here were witnesses to the decline of Immortal Mansion. They watched helplessly as a crazy spirit sword collector demon forcibly terminated all the spirit sword contracts. And then, as if he had gone mad, his hair instantly turned white from worry. Jinka had already given the master of Immortal Mansion the best punishment. Salian Jinren sighed. How to deal with the master of Immortal Mansion and the mess he had left behind was another big problem. The group of female disciples outside the Immortal Mansion still needed a lawyer to determine their nature. Although they were abducted when they were young and could be said to be innocent, according to Salian Jinren's judgment, they would definitely be sentenced to labor reform. But then again, these female inner court disciples had been educated in a closed environment. Although they lacked a lot of knowledge about modern cultivation and had a limited understanding of modern society, they still had a lot of knowledge about it. However, each of them was a talent that could be molded. This was a huge amount of soul formation stage resources. If it could be developed and used properly, it could provide a new batch of strength for the country's military. Before becoming a station manager in Grenade-throwing Senior Immortals Cultivation Forum, Salian Jinren had spent some time in the Women's Special Forces. From her point of view, if this group of female disciples were to be sent in and trained, they would be able to film a movie called I Am Special Forces Fire Phoenix next year. Brother Ling, is there any way to restrict his movements? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was still a little worried. Wang Ling nodded and raised his hand to cast the Great Silence spell. A long time ago, when cultivators cast spells, in addition to forming hand seals, they also needed to chant. Thus, the Great Muting spell was born at that time. This spell could not only seal one's mouth, but it could also block the release of spiritual energy from the body, truly muting people. However, he had also made another optimization when he used it, and that was to remove the rule of sealing one's mouth. This was to prevent the master of Immortal Mansion from playing dead during the interrogation. This was a mute package that only Ling Jinren had. Chengyu knelt on the ground, his heart filled with fear. As the master of Immortal Mansion, his experience wasn't shallow, and he could tell at a glance that the youngster in front of him had used one of the 3,000 Great Daos on him. It was actually the 3,000 Great Daos. This was the most powerful Taoist spell that countless cultivators yearned for like a flock of ducks. Even Immortal Mode and the White Knight spell couldn't hold a candle to it. What frightened Chengyu the most was that this Ling Jinren's method of casting spells was so practiced, easy and casual. Chengyu hadn't even seen him form hand seals. He would never be able to learn this technique in his entire life. What kind of person had he offended? As expected, Brother Ling is amazing. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal breathed a sigh of relief. Now, even if the intrinsic spirit field disappeared, the master of Immortal Mansion wouldn't be able to use any tricks to escape. After that, he saw Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal search the master of Immortal Mansion for a while, and finally found the spatial magic treasure that the master of Immortal Mansion used to store his treasures. It was a token with the words Heaven and Earth inside written on it. Staring at the token, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal sighed, and then looked at Chengyu a little angrily. Look at you. How much wealth have you plundered from the people all these years for that lousy sword of yours? Chengyu, Dharmaraja, Senior Immortal, are these things going to be handed over to the nation? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, of course. But I think some of the resources can still be used. We've used up a lot of spirit talismans, elixirs and so on the way here. I think we can replenish them appropriately. What do you think? Shall we take stock together? Except for Wang Ling, everyone else said in unison, We think Senior Immortal's words make sense. Wang Ling. Inside Wang Ling's intrinsic spirit field, a group of people were taking stock of their magic treasures under a palm tree. Immortal Toya was still treating Fang Xing. After coming out of the intrinsic spirit field, Fang Xing had fallen into a coma, and his injuries were more serious than Immortal Toya had imagined. Immortal Toya had already bandaged his external wounds, and had even taken out several precious tonics, which he had painstakingly refined for several months, and fed them to Fang Xing. However, although the bleeding had stopped, the young man showed no signs of waking up at all. How's the situation? Wang Ling raised his eyebrows and asked telepathically. Immortal Toya frowned at first, then shook his head. I've done my best, Wang Ling. Very quickly, Immortal Toya felt that his words were ambiguous, and hurriedly corrected himself. Ling Junren, don't misunderstand. What I mean is that with the current limited medical resources available, I've already done everything I can. To be honest, Brother Fang Xing's wound is a little strange. There's no way a normal spirit sword wound can cause sword chi to linger in the meridians for a long time after the sword is pulled out and cause damage. Speaking up to this point, Immortal Toya frowned and cupped his chin as he said, Actually, I don't think this thing can be considered sword chi, but it's like a stubborn bug that keeps gnawing away at Brother Fang Xing's meridians. Furthermore, it inhibits the production of spirit energy, making it impossible for the spirit energy in Brother Fang Xing's body to circulate. This is the biggest problem with his current coma. Wang Ling frowned. He opened his heavenly eye to scan Fang Xing's body, and sure enough, as Immortal Toya had said, he found the mysterious chi flowing through Fang Xing's meridians. It wasn't sword chi. Wang Ling's hands glowed with spirit light as he tried to remove it with the Great Purification spell, but unexpectedly failed. Sure enough, was there a problem with the Heavenly Materials sword? Chapter 307. But there was no hurry right now. The 1,000 spirit swords and Master of Immortal Mansion, Cheng Yu's intrinsic spirit field, including the Heavenly Materials sword, were currently under Jinka's control. He was considering handing over the other spirit swords to the state, and only keeping the Heavenly Materials sword for Fatty Luo to study. He felt that this spirit sword was made of a very special material. Perhaps it wasn't as simple as he had imagined. As everyone had expected, there were a lot of strange magic treasures in Cheng Yu's inner universe. Whether it was in terms of quantity or quality, they weren't the slightest bit inferior to the equipment that General Yi had dropped when he had captured the old devil. Furthermore, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had already searched many of the treasures on the Cultural Relics Bureau's official website, and they were all National Treasure magic treasures that had been on the loose. The reason why National Treasure magic treasures were called so wasn't simply because they were strong or weak. Every piece of national-level magical equipment had a touching story that carried forward the traditional virtues of society. Among the many magic treasures Cheng Yu had collected, the most top-notch National Treasure magic treasure was actually an exquisitely wrapped matchbox. What's this? Everyone was blank when they saw the matchbox. Dharmaraja opened the matchbox and found that there were no more matches inside. However, the entire matchbox was very exquisite. The four sides of the box, which was made of spirit wood, were inlaid with metal lace. It was simply like a top-notch work of art. Looking at the matchbox, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal suddenly said, "Have you heard the story of the little match that sold girls?" Everyone was suddenly enlightened. Oh, it turned out to be the story of the little match that sold girls. Wait. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal seemed to be talking about the little match that sold girls just now? F***K. What the hell was that? This is a real story that has been passed down in the past. There was a match that had become a spirit, and on Thanksgiving Day, he sold little girls on the street. It caused public outrage at the time. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal said with a sigh. Someone asked, what happened next? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. This little match that trafficked girls was burned to death on the street. Everyone. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal held the matchbox and said, So, this matchbox was actually specially made by a skilled craftsman back then. This incident served as a warning to society to care for young children and reject human trafficking. Reject child abuse and cruelty. Everyone. Chung Yu, the master of Immortal Mansion, knelt on the ground and shivered as he listened to this story, his hair standing on end. He had obtained this matchbox when he attacked the other dark forces. Even he did not know its exact origin. However, it had helped him overcome many difficulties. There was a period of time when he was at his most difficult. Chung Yu remembered that he had stayed in the matchbox for a period of time to avoid being hunted down by his enemies. Oh right, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal suddenly thought of something. This matchbox actually has a storage function, but when it was designed back then, its original intention wasn't to make it a storage space. As he spoke, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal injected spirit energy into the matchbox. In a flash, the small matchbox abruptly expanded into a rectangular storage space that was as big as a person. So, the original intention of this matchbox was, this is the coffin lid that the craftsman specially made for the match spirit back then, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal said as he cupped his chin. Chung Yu. Everyone. At the same time, it was 10 o'clock in the evening in the outside world. About 2 hours ago, the Cultivation police station on San Yuan Road in Winter City had received a tip from the public that there was a broken space here. The originally empty San Yuan Road was now surrounded by police cars, and the police had set up a long cordon around the space tunnel, which had been blasted open by the power of Wang Ling's heavenly eye. A group of police officers stood more than 10 meters away from the broken space wall. The energy fluctuations coming from it were so strong that no one dared to approach it. Are the bomb squad here yet? Chief Yu of the police station had already arrived to give instructions on the scene. They're on the way. A junior police officer was reporting on his work. He was only at the golden core stage and didn't dare approach the broken space wall at all. The energy inside was too ferocious, and he felt that if he got any closer, he would be torn to shreds by the raging spirit power. In the distance, a black commercial car drove over and was stopped by a police officer at an intersection. Seeing that it was a sky blue government license plate, the police officer hurriedly went to the driver's window and saluted respectfully. Comrade, there's been an accident up ahead. Please make a detour. Zhao Kai rolled down the window and stuck his head out. Brother, may I ask what's going on? The police officer replied in a low voice. 2 hours ago, we received a tip from the public that there was a broken space wall up ahead. There's now a raging spirit power in the space wall, and no one dares approach it. The bomb squad will be here soon. All right, thank you, brother. Zhao Kai nodded, then closed the window and turned to look at Audiobook behind him. Shifu, what do we do now? Audiobook rubbed his chin and looked at him. Are you sure this is where Ling Jinren and the others were sent down? Zhao Kai nodded abruptly like a chicken pecking at rice. It's definitely here, there's no mistake. Shifu. Audiobook folded his arms, his face instantly darkening. Even an idiot now knew that this broken space wall was definitely destroyed by your grandmaster. But Audiobook was well aware that whenever his Shifu took action, there had to be a reason. He seemed to have heard Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal mention something about Immortal Mansion, a major dark force, before, so Audiobook guessed that Shifu Ling Jinren had come to Winter City for this matter. In summary, Audiobook guessed that there were probably two possibilities. First, Shifu had smashed the space wall and entered the world inside, but hadn't finished what he had to do, so he hadn't had time to come out. This was the most likely scenario. Second, Shifu had run into trouble and couldn't come out. Of course, Audiobook thought that the probability of this happening was 1 in 10,000. It was practically impossible. Thus, the current situation was already very clear. He had to think of a way to stall the police, and before it was announced to the media, he had to first block the news until Shifu and the others had completely withdrawn from Winter City. Thinking this, Audiobook waved his hand and had Zhao Kai roll down the window. The police uncle from before was still standing next to the car. Comrade, is there anything else I can help you with? Zhao Kai grinned and looked at the police officer. Our leader is very interested in this matter and might be able to help. I'll have to trouble you to inform your chief. Leader? Which leader? The police uncle's expression instantly became nervous. He carefully crouched down and stealthily glanced at the back of the car, out of the corner of his eye. When he saw Ajua's face, he instantly broke out in a cold sweat. Chapter 308. In fact, even Ajua himself hadn't expected his reputation to have already spread so far. This wasn't just because of his relationship with Secretary Dakong, but also because of the major events that had happened around him. From the time he had officially become the deputy director of the General Administration of 100 Schools, the Gate Between Worlds incident 6 years ago, the arrest of the younger sister of the Master of Shadow Stream, Jiang Luiying, who had escaped and been recaptured a few months ago, and the most frightening thing was that even the old devil's arrest had something to do with Ajua. It could be said that ever since Ajua had chosen the path of serving the people, his official career had been on the rise and everything had been smooth sailing. He had encountered several major events in a row, which some people might never achieve in their entire lives. Just thinking about it made his scalp go numb. When this police uncle saw Ajua's face, his reaction wasn't as simple as his scalp going numb. He felt like it was going to explode. Joie, Director Joie? Why are you here, sir? The police uncle was so shocked that he couldn't speak coherently. I'll go get the chief for you. This was a big shot. Although he was a leading cadre in Songhai City, which was several cities away from Winter City, the police uncle didn't dare offend him at all. This was a legendary figure who had even brought down the old devil. He couldn't afford to offend him at all. Ajua was startled by this police uncle's reaction. He felt that this police uncle had misunderstood something. Seeing that the police uncle had gone to call for his chief, Ajua hurriedly pointed to his face and asked Zhao Kai, "Am I that scary?" Zhao Kai couldn't help snickering. Ever since that old devil was arrested, there have been different rumors about Shifu in every city and place. As for public opinion, there's always truth and falsehood. Some news will deliberately exaggerate in order to attract attention. Ajua. Then how did they spread the rumor about me? Zhao Kai. I'm not sure about the situation in other cities, but there's a widely circulated version in Winter City that Shifu assisted General Yi in setting up the 5 elements Great Array, and then used the verbal escape technique to make that old devil cry on the spot and lay down his arms and surrender. Ajua. It's all gossip, Shifu. You don't have to care too much about it. Zhao Kai scratched the back of his head. Ajua looked at him. Then, what do you think about the veracity of these things? I think it's a half-truth. Zhao Kai laughed heartily. You say if this is true, and Master is so awesome, then how coquettish must the ancestor be? Ajua. While they were talking, the policeman who had run out earlier had already returned with his bureau chief. He was a middle-aged man who looked very righteous. From his well-ironed uniform, it could be seen that he was a person who did things in a very disciplined manner. Out of politeness, Ajua directly got out of the car without the slightest air of an official. The middle-aged director was blank for a moment, before he hurriedly stepped forward to shake hands with him, and put on a smile. Director Joie, I've long heard of your great name. I wonder if Director Joie is here for official business or personal matters. Ajua thought carefully for a bit before directly saying, business. There was no way he would betray his Shifu. Before coming to Sanyuan Road, he had already told Victory Zhao that he absolutely couldn't tell anyone that Ling Zhenren and his people were here. His Shifu had always liked to keep a low profile. If this incident was accidentally reported by the media, Shifu would definitely be very unhappy. After thinking for a bit, Ajua cleared his throat and continued. Well, actually, I was the one who led this operation from another city. I haven't had the time to report it yet. After hearing Ajua's words, all the police officers present were dumbfounded. Not long ago, our Songhai City's General Administration of 100 Schools received a report that some criminals were suspected of kidnapping students. So our General Administration of 100 Schools immediately launched an investigation. In the end, we followed the clues and found this huge dark force organization. Ajwa had thought of this excuse in the car earlier, and it could be considered a random excuse. The space wall you see now was actually broken by the people we sent. Hearing this, the police officers, including this bureau chief, all sucked in cold breaths. Ajwa glanced at the police number on this bureau chief's chest, which was engraved with a name. He realized that this bureau chief's surname was Yu, and his first name was Yu. Chief Yu, I need to reflect. I'm late. All of a sudden, Ajwa stared at this bureau chief, stepped forward, and gripped his hand with a remorseful expression. Chief Yu. This was a secret operation assigned by our higher-ups, and Secretary Dakong personally signed off on it. As the person in charge of this operation, it was my dereliction of duty for not contacting Winter City in advance. No need to take it to heart, Director Zhua. It was also my fault for not understanding the situation in advance. Chief Yu felt inexplicably flattered. Then, Zhao Kai and the other police officers saw the two leaders shake hands and bow to each other in apology, as if they were bowing to heaven and earth. Although this was just a formality, Yu's rumored impression of Ajwa changed a lot. He gripped Ajwa's hand tightly and said with a serious expression, If there's anything you need us to cooperate with, Director Zhua, feel free to let us know. All right. Ajwa nodded solemnly, and then unhurriedly set out his requirements. First, this is a secret mission assigned to us by Secretary Dakong. So before the results of the investigation are out, we have to keep the news under wraps and not let the media know. Second, we have to strictly protect the privacy of everyone in the investigation team entering this dark forces lair. That's all for now. After Ajwa said this, Chief Yu immediately looked at his subordinate next to him. Did you hear that? Immediately call the technical team and get the media under control. Those who called for interviews earlier, now reject all of them. The junior police officer stood ramrod straight and immediately nodded in salute. Yes, Chief. After doing this, Ajwa stared at the broken space wall not far away and heaved a long sigh of relief. Fortunately, he had arrived in time, and the situation was under control. Otherwise, if the first batch of media had arrived, the situation would have become a lot more troublesome. Zhao Kai parked the car and followed Ajwa. There was one thing he was very curious about, so he asked Ajwa in a very low voice, Shifu, when did Secretary Dakong approve this? There was no need to hide this matter from his own family, so Ajwa directly answered, to be precise, just now. Zhao Kai was blank. Just now? That's right, 10 minutes ago, on the way here. I sent Secretary Dakong a text message, said Ajwa. Zhao Kai was stunned. He had never thought that Ajwa and Secretary Dakong would actually be so familiar with each other that he would immediately approve a text message. Ignoring Zhao Kai's shocked expression, Ajwa looked at the time and said, I sent Shifu a text message earlier, and he replied with a series of ellipses. What does that mean? You'll know when you're in contact with them more in the future. You have to learn to read all kinds of languages from the ellipses. I reckon they're almost done. I have a task for you now. Hold a welcome party for them later. What do you want me to do? Zhao Kai was suddenly a little nervous. Later I'll drive. Get Chief Yu a 5-star red flag of our country, and put it on your arm. Then squat on the roof of the car, and find 2 people to support you. Once they come out, we'll drive over. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.